All right, well, this is what we're here for today. Get comfortable, cause it's gonna be bad. John Doyle has a new video where he just basically says, "I don't give a shit that Putin and Russia invaded Ukraine for 2 hours." So let's get settled in and get ready for some bad takes and cringe. Let's do it.
Same thing with war. It'll continue. The endless war.
Oh, look, it's the MAGA hat that he said he was never going to take off. Remember that? Whatever happened to that?
The forever wars. The wars for liberalism. And a lot of this stuff, like I said, is not going to happen immediately, but you can definitely expect at least one new military conflict within the first term of the Biden administration.
No, John Doyle, that will not happen. You are not a preeminent genius, nor...
John, the United States isn't in a new military conflict. Russia instigated a military conflict with Ukraine. You're going to talk about it for 2 hours. You know what's happening, right?
Nor are you handsome and cool, which is why many people do not want to be your friend and invite you to pizza parties. Joe Biden is a competent leader who is respected by the world. Liberal democracy will always prevail. Why, yes, I am fat, gay, and retarded, and my entire ideology is a series of rational prevail. Why, yes.
How many times am I going to have to pause this for reports?
I am fat, gay, and retarded, and my entire ideology is a series of
Speedy Yoshi says, oh look, he's trying to appeal to people who are still S-wording hardcore for Trump. Yep.
rationalizations for why I'm addicted to touching my own PP and want to molest children.
I've been ready. Hannah has to report. I think that'd be dangerous to everyone's health.
I gotta go get it.
Any worry about copyright? I'll cut it out if I have to. It's fine. Ashy Boo says, John has been slurping the big Russian propaganda juice.
John Doyle in. Heck off, commie.
Don't worry though, guys, because John Doyle actually thinks we're all the ones who have been propagandized, and in fact, we're wrong for thinking it's not cool to invade a sovereign nation. It's actually very cool, according to John. Because NATO bad.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Heck Off Commie. We are here today as America's leading expert on foreign policy, real, to discuss the unpopular but...
It's funny, too, because actually in this video, John Doyle does a lot of the same talking points I've seen tankies come out with recently about the Ukraine situation. So I think this is the closest to tanky John is probably ever going to be.
Correct take on Ukraine, on Russia, on everything that's been going on recently, and we're going to cover a lot of information that basically no one else is talking about, so if you're interested...
I did have to nuke the stream from Tuesday, yes.
...in truth, or at least having an open mind, then you do have to watch all the way through, and I'm going to respectfully ask for your patience here, because even if you disagree, you do kind of have to acknowledge that I'm swimming upstream against what is a virtual consensus in the media and in the government. Remember, all of the people who you know are corrupt liars who have sold you out at every opportunity that they've been given, but now all of a sudden... Now we're going to trust him. We're going to trust the experts to be honest with us.
The mainstream media said it's raining today, which means it is absolutely a sunny day out, clearly.
To tell us what is good and what is bad, but because of...
The point I'm trying to make is you can disagree with mainstream media and understand that there are different biases and motives at play with different organizations and different media sources, while also recognizing that you can watch media, read media, and still gain information from it. If you're smart and not John Doyle, whose entire identity is wrapped around trying to 14 words America. Lily Love Stuff says, I mean, NATO is bad, but invading a sovereign nation is worse.
That there's a lot to get through, and my biggest fear is that I don't get to make my case in its entirety, and there's a few important reasons that I waited to talk about this for so long, but here we go. So, as I'm sure you're aware, a few weeks ago Russia launched an invasion into neighboring Ukraine, and what we have witnessed in the time since has been absolutely incredible. And since I'm not interested in wasting anybody's time, I'll just state my position now, which is that I literally do not care about it in the slightest, and there's actually...
which is why he made almost a 2-hour video about it. I often make 2-hour videos about things I do not care about at all. Renandia Owl says, rain is just a hoax perpetuated by Big Umbrella. Change my mind. I won't. That's absolutely accurate.
Actually no reason for American patriots to care about it in the slightest, and this is not because I'm apathetic towards it, but rather because I actually understand it very well, which is why, if anything, I'm probably more sympathetic to the Russians, actually. And if you disagree with me, you don't like my
Shocked face. Yeah, we know, John.
position. If that position angers you, don't write to me anything angry. It would actually be a better use of your time to just write a letter to the State Department in which you congratulate them on the effectiveness of their propaganda. And I'm saying this outright, again, because I'm really not interested in wasting anybody's time. And these last few weeks have really vindicated that belief I have that something like 95% of people aren't even real people. They don't have agency. They're NPCs. And I've tried
Ah, yes. Dehumanizing people. A very good thing to do when you're not a Nazi.
having this conversation with people who I used to respect, and it's literally not possible because nothing
Can't
they're
say
saying
the
is
S
like
word.
an actual arguments or even something that can be maybe better explained
Maoist with 100
additional
bits.
context. No, it's literally just lies. It's the understanding of global politics that is the caliber of a Saturday morning cartoon. Like, they can only conceptualize geopolitics like they're used to seeing in cartoons or movies, where there's just this madman and he's just gone mad with power and he's going to take over the world and blow us to bits. It's not even worth engaging with. So save us both the time, because if you're upset about my
John, I don't have to agree with Putin or think he is a supervillain. I think he miscalculated. I think he made a strategic move that was miscalculated. Strawmanning doesn't help you, John. Speedy Yoshi says, count all the times he says something Russia propaganda-y. Lily Love Stuff says, so John Doyle was not making video because he was being paid off by the Russian government? Tinfoil hat. If I had to tinfoil hat, and I don't necessarily think this is true, but it would be funny if it was. John Doyle makes like one video every 2 months now, if not longer. I have no idea how he's sustaining himself at this point, but it would be hilarious if he actually was getting paid by some weird source to spread like white nationalist misinformation.
position on this, not just the
H. Baird says, I recently realized that Doyle is trying to make himself sound like CNN, MSNBC era Tucker Carlson. He wants to be legitimate so fucking bad, which is so funny considering he constantly goes on and on about how, like, illegitimate, like, mainstream news sources are. But if he got offered a job at Fox News, he would take it like that. It would be hilarious. I mean, it wouldn't be hilarious. I don't think we need more white nationalists at Fox News, but still.
that you disagree, but you can feel yourself become upset by my position. It is 100% because you've been consuming the mainstream media propaganda, which we can't forget is engineered to get you to react in a certain way. And if you haven't taken the time to understand the history of this,
Renandia Owl says, nobody tell him RT ceased operation in the States. Maupin is still sad about losing his job. Did see that. That was good.
you haven't taken the time to listen to what the Russian government has been saying about this, not even just recently, but in 2018, 2014, 2007, 1997, etc.
Wait, why? What? So we shouldn't listen to what you consider mainstream media propaganda, but we should listen to Russian state propaganda. Genius. J.I. Lost says he got hired by a secret whites-only Subway location. He is good at making them sandwiches.
At the very least, just watch this all the way through, because
Only on white bread, though. Maps and Mimics with 15 months says, our first sub baby is only half a year old and already Gigantor, the Dark Lord of All, is 42 stories. Should we be concerned? No. When he hits 60, we should start probably talking to a doctor, but 42's nothing.
otherwise you're just in an echo chamber that was designed, again, to emotionally manipulate you. I promise you that there's no argument or piece of information that you could...
The right never emotionally manipulates everyone, which is why they're going so hard right now and calling Disney groomers for having the audacity to recognize that, checks notes, gay people exist.
present to me about this, which I haven't heard before, especially if you're just
How's Big Stinky Baby doing? Big Stinky Baby took care of itself because he kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually he escaped the atmosphere. So, I don't know how to put this. There is a large Big Stinky Baby corpse currently orbiting the Earth, but it's fine. It's in geosynchronous orbit over France, so, like, that's not my problem, you know? Speedy Yoshi says, what do you think of Sarah's broccoli tweet? It was gross. It was gross. I got posted to Reddit. It was pretty funny. Lily Love Stuff says, is Italian urban spices too ethnic for John? I'm going to say yes.
Paraphrasing whatever you just heard from the screen people within the last 10 days about this. Oh, well, he must not care about Ukraine. He must not know all of these things I just learned from the screen people about Eurasian geopolitics. Right. So at least hear me out and then make up your mind. But yeah, we're going to go over why everyone suddenly cares about this, if anybody should be caring about this. Most importantly, why the people in charge want you to care about this, along with so much more, so do stay tuned. But before we even get into what's happening and if anyone should care about this, let's just leave that as neutral right now. We have to at least acknowledge first that this seemingly overnight consensus is formed that it is the morally correct position to be outspokenly in support of Ukraine right now, right? I mean, think about it. Like, who in your day-to-day life ever mentioned Ukraine as recently as 2 months ago? But now I would wager that everyone...
I know when Russia took Crimea back in, oh gosh, was that around 2011 or 2014? I can't remember. Anyway, whenever Russia took that, that was a big deal. So the discussion, it was 2014. Thank you. So I know discussions around that have certainly been a thing more around that time. But then since then, a lot of other stuff has happened. But John, regardless, yeah, people will start talking about a region when a large regional superpower like Russia unilaterally decides to invade a sovereign neighboring nation. People tend to care about that. Stone Corbell says, John, by any definition, you are a screen person. Yeah. Yes, he is. Maoist says, we should play a drinking game for everything he dog whistles. Again, only if you want to die. And I don't think you should.
In your circle has probably brought it up to you, or maybe you felt compelled to bring it up to them and they've got an opinion on it, maybe you do, etc. The point being that this is the grandest display of what's being referred to now as mass formation psychosis or groupthink, people being sheep, being lemmings, etc., that we've ever seen. Because even with something like Black Lives Matter,
I like that one of his examples was people with Biden-Harris on their head, when ironically the visual indicator of a Trump supporter is literally them putting a slogan of Trump on their forehead with a very visible red hat. But that's not NPC groupthink behavior. That's the mark of a free thinker. Anti-Pretzel says, fun fact, there's a man who legally changed his name to Santa Claus, also looks like Santa, who's running against Sarah Palin. He's pretty hard against everything she stands for. Vote for Claus 22. Yeah, I heard about that.
You know, that dates back to 2014. It took a while for it to become like a household name or a household discussion, or even with the pandemic. There was a build-up to the peak of it, and it was actually originally a left-wing position to not buy into it because they thought that Trump was trying to, like, manufacture this crisis.
No, it wasn't. John, that was only 2 years ago. We were there. What are you talking about? Trump was immediately, when this started coming up in the news, like, it's gonna go away in 2 weeks. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's a liberal hoax that it's gonna be an issue. What are you talking about? Is John just trying to gaslight us about something we were literally all here for? What the hell?
In order to stay in power. So we at least have to appreciate this in terms of like the just complete government and media consensus, complete domination of all narratives, and proportion of subscription and engagement from the general public. This is probably the greatest example of this phenomenon in history, largely thanks to technology and in particular social media. So if we can at least agree that this concern has been manufactured by the media and by the government, maybe...
Lily Love Stuff says, me, John, I go to Ukraine more often than your average American. I cared about Belarus prior to the protests happening there, and I'm concerned about the way things are going in Turkey, Hungary, and Poland too, but I also care about Yemen, Tigray, Palestine, and Syria too. John, I don't know if you know this, but other people have this thing called empathy, where when you hear that a bunch of people are dying and being harmed because another nation's geopolitical dick contest decided to turn into an invasion, oh no, that's bad, I feel bad about that, that's not good. Most people have empathy, ergo, people start supporting the group that are the victims of said invasion. This is not hard to understand, again, if you are a human being with emotions.
For a good reason, maybe not for a good reason, that nobody would have been talking about this if not for these narratives being evangelically established by virtually every influential institution in the country. We then have to ask ourselves if this is legitimate or not. And we're not even talking...
John basically just said this wouldn't be part of the conversation nationally if it wasn't part of the conversation nationally. Yes, John, people talk about things. That's how that works. Huz Khalifa says, funny how many Ukrainians are being allowed as refugees in a conflict the U.S. wasn't involved with compared to Afghans who have, left behind or denied entry to. Yeah, gee, I wonder what the difference is.
Talking about their
Sarcasm.
end of it yet, right? Like, we're not even talking about whether the United States necessarily has a geopolitical interest in Ukraine that's legitimate. Like, we're still talking about it from our end. So let me ask you something if you're in the pro-Ukraine camp. Did you care about the civil war in Guatemala, which killed 100,000 people? Or what about the Iran?
Yes, all of these things I would care about if I was told about them. When told about conflicts, that is upsetting to me. Yes.
Iraq war, which killed 1 million people. Certainly the Congo Civil War, which has killed 5.5 million people.
Yeah, these things are bad, John. What has this gotcha? Do you care about all these other people dying? Yes. I do. Do you not? What? Hernandia Owl says, considering Putin's excuse was to, quote, denazify Ukraine, I somehow thought John Doyle would care about it a lot more.
Or at least the drug wars in Mexico, right, which have killed 375,000 people.
Which is also bad, which is why I have advocated for decriminalization of drugs to try and take power and money away from cartels. Yeah.
All of these conflicts have occurred in the last few decades. They've all objectively been more brutal than what's happening now. So why didn't
Citation.
you care? Like, seriously, why not? Why didn't anyone care? And the reason that
People do care.
no one, including yourself, gave a damn is the same reason that everyone, including yourself, give.
Also, you're comparing civil conflicts, which I'm not disregarding those. I'm not trying to make it seem like those are not important or not whatever. But it's more impactful, at least in international news, when a larger nation invades a sovereign nation than it is when there is internal conflict or even civil conflict. If we're talking about, like, drug wars in Mexico between cartels, that's not even a governmental thing. That's a basically gang issue, which is terrible and is something that I am concerned about, but also not as striking, right? You hear Russia invades Ukraine. Yeah, people are going to take that as a bigger issue. But, regardless, yes, they're all shitty. J.I. Law says, John does have feelings. They're just completely fascist, misinformed, outdated, and therefore wrong ones.
Gives a damn now. The media. So the only question left for an honest person to ask themselves is, why does the media want me to care about this conflict in particular? Less people are dying. It's less brutal. We have no geopolitical.
Russia's literally been just going through and killing civilians. What?
Interest in Ukraine, just as we did in all these other conflicts.
Lily Lovestuff says, the civil war in Guatemala was literally funded by the U.S. government, so Americans aren't going to know about that. Oof.
So then why? What's your answer? You don't have one. Because you didn't care, and you probably didn't even know about those, and yet, amazingly, you still probably feel exactly the same
People
about
know about drug wars in Mexico, John.
the Ukraine situation despite this, because your position is not rooted in historical knowledge. It is rooted in that you have been emotionally manipulated by wartime propaganda. That is the reality of your situation. And the only thing left for you to do, if you're an honest person, is to ask yourself why that may be. Why do all of the people in the world who you know are the worst, who you know are against you...
John, I think you're the worst. I think you're the worst. So... H. Baird says, lots of people cared. Most of those things happened before he was born. Does he think that if no one tells him that people cared at any time they didn't, does he not have object permanence?
Why do they want you to buy into this? And believe me, I know the usual suspects. You'll tell me, oh, Russia's a communist dictatorship that hates us for our freedom. That's actually...
No, they haven't. The Soviet Union fell in '89. That's a weird straw man. Speedy Yoshi says, why are we caring that, like, the third most powerful country in the world is trying to take over and kill an entire country?
Not true. Like, I'm not even just saying that to push back. Like, that's just...
John is so fucking weird. He's not weird. He's disingenuous. Never look at John and go, he's so misinformed. John isn't misinformed. He's intentionally lying to his audience for a purpose.
Objectively not true. Oh, it's our patriotic duty to fight for freedom. Putin's a madman who's gonna blow us to bits the second he gets the chance. He's just like Hitler. If he takes Ukraine, he won't stop. Domino theory. Something Cold War, damn it. These are all ridiculous positions. I'm sorry. It's true. These are all ridiculous positions, and as we continue, we'll explain. But if you're still on the fence about this whole thing, you'll notice the people who are in opposition to me, the people who are not even just neutral or ambivalent, but the people who are pro-Ukraine, they are literally incapable of making arguments. Like, everything that they're saying boils down basically to, people are dying, we have to stand up for our values, whatever that means. Like, who's this our?
not wanting countries to invade other sovereign nations, and before John whataboutisms like the U.S. is invading other countries. I agree, that's bad too. I also disagree with that, John. So, what's the issue here? Hernandy Owl says, going back to the Maupin comment, John is being just about as condescending as him here. Just because your Nazi buddies don't know history doesn't mean the rest of the population doesn't. J.A. Lost says, you don't care because the things are backed up actual historical facts. You care because you're brainwashed by the media with wartime propaganda. Does John have no self-reflection whatsoever? No.
I'm not dying for pride praising Kiev. I'm not going to do it. Or literally like, oh, well, if we don't take out Putin, he's going to blow us to bits. Like, it's always the Saturday morning cartoon. It's always them projecting their own emotional manipulation onto you, etc. Like, these are just not serious people. And I'm probably going to get frustrated when talking about this. I will. But you'll notice that it's only going to be when we're talking about how all of a sudden everybody has allowed the media to manipulate them.
All of a sudden, John. Not all of the sudden, idiot.
To supporting this narrative. Like, you're not going to see me getting all emotional when talking about, what led to this, whether we have any interest in Ukraine, why the globalist American empire wants us to, all get on board with this, etc. But, the same can't be said for these people who all of a sudden are so
globalist dog whistle, by the way.
A country that never crossed their mind as recently as 4 weeks ago. And it's because they can only argue from emotion because they were only convinced by emotion.
John, Ukraine has literally been in the news as recently as, 2017, 2018, Donald Trump literally got impeached the first time over withholding aid from Ukraine to try and blackmail, but not blackmail, extort, that's the word, to extort the Ukrainian government in order to try and get dirt on Biden. John, what?
Propaganda that was literally engineered to elicit an emotional response from you, which would compel you to support a narrative. And I know we've spent a lot of time on this, but this cannot be overstated because it just shows that having a free and normal society is impossible in this country with the way that the media is currently operating, because people are at any given point literally days away from falling into line with whatever the regime decides. And, I know...
Let me guess. Lugenpressen.
I'm such a chipper young man. Always got a pep in the step. This issue, though, in particular, it struck a nerve. It's the inflection point between my favorite thing in the world, which is the boys, the forgotten gamers of America, and my least favorite thing in the world, the global libtard menace, the globalist American empire, mobilizing all the retarded people to get the boys killed, ruin whatever future prospects they have left. And, I guess you could say that me caring about that is what influences my view on this. But, we talk about that too, how as much as we would like to pretend otherwise, the politics is always personal. And the difference would be that I am consciously choosing to care about the boys, which is why we advocate for the Christian virtues. We advocate against vices like pornography and drug use, which, it's applicable to everybody, but still.
The boys deserve to jerk off, John.
And it recalls something that my mom used to say to my sister and me when we were growing up, which is, I think it comes from Proverbs. It's that you have to guard your heart. She's going to see this. She's going to get so excited. Hey, you're not off the hook yet. Frankly, you need to be guarding your heart from Fox News propaganda, Mom. Fox News warmongering that's going to get me and my cool friends killed, Mom.
Hydrate.
Mama. But this really is important, especially given the way the flow of information has developed in this country.
Imagine the disappointment of having John Doyle as a kid. My God. The horror.
Like, you really have to guard your heart, which of course means that you have to be very careful with what goes into it, very careful about what comes out of it, because you really do have something of an emotional bandwidth. You only have so much energy.
It's sad that some Q people are supporting Putin. Yeah. A lot of QAnon people are. Scott Fallen says, the left is emotional, huh? Is this coming from the man who rage quit democracy briefly like a little bitch because his orange hero lost? It's cute that you said briefly, as if you think he's still not anti-democracy. John has been on the record as saying he doesn't think women should have the right to vote. I don't think his beliefs on anti-suffrage ends with women, if you know what I mean.
To give, so to speak. And if you're not guarding your heart, then you're only one or two pieces of state propaganda away from losing control of yourself and basically being puppeteered by your heartstrings. You have to be on top of these things.
Which isn't what John Doyle does at all. Lily Lovestuff says, if the draft comes back, can it only target chuds, and when they're deployed, they aren't given any weapons? The draft isn't coming back. If the draft came back, it would backfire horribly by the United States government. It just wouldn't work out. Not to mention the shape of, America's youth is not... How do we put this? I don't think most of the youth of America falls in line with the standards set by the armed forces.
Because people
Which I think is a good thing.
cannot be able to manipulate you by your emotions, because your emotions above all else are what compel you to act. And so we have to be very careful. It is absolutely senseless to invest emotional energy into that which you cannot control. So it's not that we don't recognize that people dying is bad, that war is a tragedy. Of course we do, but we're also maintaining control of our emotions so as to analyze it as objectively as possible. And this is often overlooked within the discussion surrounding discipline, being stoic, etc. You have to be in control of your emotions, not ignore them, pretend they don't exist, but to have control over them. You have to guard your heart. And for some reason that we'll explore as we continue, all of the worst people in the world, the most incompetent people in the world, the ones in charge of what we all know is going to hell in a handcart, the people who celebrate the genocide of the unborn, they openly advocate for sexual activity with children, the people who destroyed our...
Okay, we're doing that straw man again. Great. Nerdandy Owl says, considering you just claimed 95% of people are NPCs, I'm sure he'd love to only landowning people to be able to vote. H. Baird says, oh, I can vote then. That's good. H. Baird says, they should get rid of selective service already. It's a waste of money that makes government forms exasperating for trans people. Yeah.
Economy and muzzled your children. These are the people who are now telling you. Again, it is a virtual consensus that you really just need to care about this. You really just need to support this narrative. And like what? You trust them all of a sudden? And remember, we learned from the prophet
Again, all of a sudden. Why does he say all of the sudden? J.I. Lost says, the real most incompetent people are the friends John made along the way.
Isaiah, that those who deny God and turn away from his truth will be blinded by him and made incapable of seeing the truth. So perhaps you should ask yourself if the people who deny even the truth of biological sex are really the people with whom you...
John, no, I understand that there is a distinction between biological sex and sociological gender, which has been explained to you. J.I. Lost says, the real most incompetent people are friend... Oh, I read that one.
You should be allied right now. That's the bottom line. If you are buying into this narrative, you are allied with the people who you know.
Who tried to legalize child marriage recently again? Republicans.
Are the worst people in the world.
Was that in Tennessee? What state was that? I forget.
And an honest person would think twice about why that...
Tennessee, yep.
May be, because that should alarm you. And frankly, if you've bought into this in any capacity, I will never fully respect you again. Like, you've shown us who you are. And maybe my opinion of you means very little. It probably should. I'm just a guy. But the point is that when you entertain the promotion of wartime propaganda, when you expend your emotional bandwidth on this, you are, whether you intend to or not, enabling the foundations to be built for sending young Christian boys to go die fighting on behalf of an evil empire. So,
just Christian boys, though. They don't enlist any non-Christians and non-boys. Moppy Muttons, thanks for 9 months. That's a sub, baby. This sub baby's name is going to be... John Boyle. Moppy Mutton says, oh, looky, it's a sub, baby. Thanks for the awesome streams. For me and my house, we're Hanamaniacs. It's been wonderful watching you grow. Much love, Queen. Thank you.
If your political opinions are going to get my friends and any fraction of the next generation of Americans killed for nothing, just shut the fuck up. Just shut your fucking mouth. Like, I know that we live in a democracy, and you think your opinion and your voice, like, really matters? It doesn't. I know you oh, you're really doing your research on this, right? By listening to different components of what is a virtual consensus by the media, which, by the way, is all owned by like 6 different companies and which serves as the propaganda extension of the regime. Oh, and you're talking to your friends about it. Oh, well, did you hear these bullet points from Sean Hannity that I just learned that were all disproved an hour later? Oh, interesting. Well, you know, I heard these bullet points that turned out to be lies 2 hours later. Did you know these? Like, just stop.
Nandy Owl says, and I guess he thinks there are no boys in Ukraine, which is why he doesn't care.
If you do not have knowledge or opinions of this conflict that transcend the caliber of a Saturday morning cartoon, or if you're not willing to pick up a rifle or at least send enough money for one soldier's equipment, probably about $20,000 over there, shut up indefinitely. Nothing you say about this matters. You are contributing to the hive mind consensus.
Speedy Yoshi says, John Doyle, I don't like war except unless it's against non-straight, non-white, non-cis people, but if it's against Russia, then nah. For the record, I don't think America should go to war with Russia. I would agree. I think what we're doing right now in terms of providing resources to Ukraine is about as far as we should go with this, unless things escalate further.
That is designed to get...
And by escalate further, I mean if Russia were to continue to, like, try and annex things. Meek says, geez, each video he makes is weaker and weaker points. This video is just indefensible. Yeah, he's getting real fucking lazy.
American boys killed. You are filling the role of the useful idiot for a regime that hates you. Do you understand that? How could you not understand that after the last 2 years of the American experience? Because I've probably read a dozen or so books on this. Well, what, so that makes you the expert? More than you? Yeah, and likely more than anyone that you've talked to about this.
Who wrote the books, John? What books did you read? Because if I read a dozen books written by idiots, not making me smarter. Sky Come Fallen says, just shut up. Let me think about that.
No.
J. Laws says, yes, John, because every American is able to spare $20,000 for one soldier. That's what the point he was trying to make, was that it's very expensive.
And certainly more than the screen people who are feeding you this bullshit that you gobble up like a pig. And I know I'm abrasive right now, but at least it's because I'm choosing to care. At least it's because I
Now?
consciously
That's an easy joke.
and actually care about this country and what's best for its families. And as we'll explain, that is the opposite of all of this.
Want to bet one of those books was Day of the Rope? John has already read Day of the Rope.
But I'm
Also, Day of the Rope is the name. The Day of the Rope is not the name of the book. It's the something Turner Diaries. Is it just the Turner Diaries? I want to say it's just the Turner Diaries.
thinking we need an ill-timed product placement to lighten the mood. Oh, what's that? There's an ammo shortage, and yet companies that are saying they care about Americans are sending ammo to other countries? You don't need that energy in your life. You do need...
John, do you need more ammo than a group of people who are actively being invaded by a foreign entity? So you can go, like, shoot on the weekend with your buddies? You're kind of a selfish asshole. I knew that already, but, like...
the iTarget Pro. This revolutionary system allows you to dry fire
Oh, look, it's an ad.
practice with
skipping
your
the
actual
ad.
got a jaw button or firearms. This is the smartest way for you to practice. Be thinking about two things. These really are the two most important things for American patriots to be thinking about above all else. And I think that if we could channel our focus and our energy onto these things instead of the other nonsense that we tend to do that with, we might actually have a shot at turning the ship around. So the first one is very simply, are we an actual country? Is the United States of America an actual country?
Yes. Literally, yes. I don't know what rhetorical exercise you're about to go through, John, but it's gonna probably be annoying. Narnandia says, John, just because you're making sarcastic jokes about how tasteless your shilling is doesn't make it excusable.
Is it a unique nation, or is it simply a tool to be used by the rest of the world? Like, oh, you want a military to fight for you? United States. You want a higher material standard of living? United States. Like, the point is that if we think that the purpose of the United States of America is to defend the desired purposes of other countries, and if we think that the purpose of the American people is to perpetually sacrifice for everyone else in the world while getting nothing in return for it, then we've lost the plot, and we deserve whatever happens to us. And the second thing to be thinking about is the unavoidable reality that in the same way that a compass, when functioning properly, will always point north, any analysis of the issues facing the American people, when conducted properly, is always going to point back to their government and to their ruling class as the culprit. Like, virtually in every case. I've stayed up, I've done the math. There is virtually no problem facing the American people that cannot be traced back to the dangerous mixture of malevolence, incompetence, and corruption that rules over us and that has for quite some time. And you look at what happened when we got Donald Trump in the presidency. Like,
Who was great. Absolutely. And there was no corruption. Don't look into that.
he did not have nearly as much power or influence as he should have. Like, he really wasn't that right wing, but he had
Donald Trump wasn't right-wing enough.
good instincts, and within a couple of years we'd achieved energy independence. We were pulling out of the forever wars, the unnecessary wars. Gas was under $2 a gallon. The food,
John, gas was cheap because of the pandemic that disallowed people from going places. And it wasn't under $2 a gallon anywhere I lived, and I live in a place where it's pretty cheap to get gas relative to the national average.
it was cheaper, the economy was booming, and less than a year since they fortified him from the Oval Office, literally everything has gone to shit. That's the micro timeline.
That very, very zoomed-in chart seemed honest and not at all cherry-picked.
Look at the macro timeline in terms of how this country in general has gone to hell in the last 60, 70 years or so. And maybe we can't quite articulate why that is or what exactly changed, what went wrong, but we all sense that it's true. And thus was born the greatest presidential campaign slogan in the history of American politics: Make America Great Again. I could do a whole video talking about the subtle brilliance of that. And I probably will in the DeSantis versus Trump matchup video. But the point is that as this country's trust level has dropped from up upwards of 70% to below 50%. As we've become more polarized, we've lost any sense of national identity, be it religious, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, whatever. And operating under that framework is just simply not conducive to actually having a country. And so these wars and conflicts have come in very useful for our ruling class, because if you don't have a people who are united in support of anything anymore, well, you can just simply have a people who are united in opposition to something. So maybe they don't go to the same church as their neighbor, maybe they don't speak the same language as their neighbor, maybe they've never even spoken to their neighbor, but hey, damn it, they both saw on the TV that the real threat to this country is sitting over there in Moscow or in Baghdad or in Beijing, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of see how they can simultaneously delay the collapse by trying to spark unity through opposition to a manufactured enemy, which is...
That's literally what the right does constantly, John. They did it with LGBT people, they did it with Black Lives Matter, they're doing it now with trans people, they did it with critical race theory. This is a thing the right does constantly, is propping up straw man enemies in order to try and unify their base who have wildly different beliefs on what they should actually be doing. So instead, what they actually want to do is show, again, straw men enemies that they can target in order to get the base riled up to go and vote. Bittergrin says, if it was such a great slogan, then where's the hat you promised to never take off, John? And Mike says, John, why the heck off commie sign still up if you support Putin? Putin's not a communist.
It's working less successfully for them by the cycle, mind you, while also just kind of playing hot potato.
Sorry, I missed Overthought's bits. Overthought said, I'm going to Minecraft if they mention gas prices one more time, like the price of Ukraine's life is somehow less than $4. And Cult of Cautious Optimism says, I love how he says he wants people to be united in agreement of something, while a few seconds ago complaining other people in the media agree on something like the Russian invasion. Sky Comet Fallen says, Trump didn't make that up. 1930s literal American Nazis made up Make America Great Again. John, do you think it's a coincidence that the right chose to resurrect it? And J.I. Lost says, this is just John exhibiting another typical righty trait and accusing the left of what the right is doing. Projection.
With who's really to blame for the problems faced by the American people, despite the fact that, like we said, 100% of the blame is on our own ruling class. And we will prove that as we continue. Well, I don't know, John. I'm really thinking that Russia's the bad guy here. Okay, that's fine. Why? Think about that. Why do you think that all of a sudden Russia just invaded Ukraine? What do you believe is their end goal? Well, it's because Biden's weak, right? But that just gives an opportunity, right, to fulfill a greater goal. So what is that? What do you think that is? And some people will just never be able to grasp things like this. Like, there are purportedly rational, productive adults in this country who wake up, they get dressed, they eat, and then they think things like, why are all these crazy bad guys trying to blow up the world for no reason? Democracy is such a joke. Like, these people vote, by the way. Democracy is when the ruling class uses its media to brainwash the masses into supporting something, and then they hold a vote on it and they call it legitimate. It is...
Again, John doesn't like the fact that we get to vote.
So spiritually gay. But anyways, Russia doesn't have to be politically correct and speak to the masses like they're children. They can act...
Stromboli for Wi-Fi says, Hannah, you constantly adjust yourself in your seat. Do you need a new gamer chair, or is it an ADHD thing? Can we crowdfund a seat for Hannah? The chair is very comfortable. It's an ADHD thing.
Actually explain themselves very clearly. And so before we continue, I would like to play a short clip of Putin briefly explaining his actions, and then we'll put it into the historical context.
And if I trust anyone, it's Putin, a literal dictator.
And into the contemporary context as we continue our discussion. But as we watch, I'll be on the lookout for signs of a crazy bad guy who just wants to blow us to bits and take over the world. Please be studious and vigilant as well. I might miss something. And again,
Again, Putin as like a crazy person is a complete straw man argument. I don't consider Putin crazy. I consider him a despot who made a really, really bad strategic move in order to try and re-secure an area of the world that used to belong to Russia that he thought he could easily get, which turned out to not be easy.
Really want you to be thinking about why he's doing this.
Sky Comet Fallen says, Russia is a dictatorship, John. Yeah, he likes that.
What he's trying to gain from this, because for some reason the Western media isn't playing clips like this. They're basically just in hysterics comparing Putin to Hitler, accusing him of war crimes, playing footage of sad things happening, etc., etc. And if I didn't respect you,
sad things like people being murdered,
guys, I would just do the same thing, because warmongering is making a lot of people a lot of money right now. But it's not about money, it's about sending a message. This country deserves a better class of right-wing e-boy, and I'm going to give it to him. Tell your viewers they're watching me now. They won't watch. They won't subscribe to a Putin apologist. Why don't I leak some screenshots or photographs from DC parties to your donors? And then we'll see how loyal an establishment shill really is. It's not about money. It's about sending a message and then financing that message with money from good people and underwear companies and firearm accessory companies. Okay, we're gonna watch the video now.
Что будет, от чего зависит? Будет ли что-то зависеть от хода переговоров? Наши действия будут зависеть не от хода переговоров, а от безусловного обеспечения безопасности России сегодня и на...
John, despots like using the veneer of national security in order to justify, quote, preemptive invasion of other countries is not a new tactic. That's literally, and I know you made fun of people comparing Putin to Hitler, but that was one of the things Hitler said when he invaded Poland, was that it was defensive.
на историческую перспективу. В этой связи мы ясно и четко дали понять, что дальнейшее движение НАТО на восток неприемлемо. Ну чего здесь...
Again, talking about NATO's expansion. In a little bit here, John is also going to be like, wait, NATO's eastern expansion is unacceptable, and oh, it's not okay for Russia to expand westward, but it's okay for NATO to expand eastward, making it sound as if NATO is forcibly at gunpoint telling a country, you need to join NATO or I'm gonna fucking invade you, when the reality is NATO is a voluntary treaty organization and it's not the same thing as invasion. Trying to make equivalent these two things is comically stupid.
Мы что ли ставим ракеты рядом с границами Соединенных Штатов? Нет. Это же Соединенные Штаты своими ракетами пришли к нашему дому. На пороге нашего дома находятся уже. Ну разве это какое-то избыточное требование не ставить больше никаких ударных систем у нашего дома? Ну чего здесь необычного? Вот как американцы бы отнеслись, если мы взяли там на границе между Канадой и США или на границе Мексики и США, поставили бы наши ракеты? А что, разве у Мексики и у США не было никогда территориальных вопросов? А Калифорния кому принадлежала раньше? А Техас? Подзабыли, что ли? Ну ладно, все затихло. Никто не вспоминает про это, так как вспоминают сегодня про Крым. Замечательно. Но и мы стараемся не вспоминать о том, что как Украина-то складывалась. Кто ее создал-то? Ленин Владимир Ильич. Когда создавал Советский Союз. Договор 22 года союзный и 24 год Конституции. Правда, после его смерти, но по его принципам создан. Значит, вопрос в безопасности. Сейчас, бог с ней с историей. Вопрос в обеспечении безопасности. Поэтому нам важен не ход переговоров, нам важны результаты. Ну разве мы не знаем? Я же много раз уже об этом сказал. И вы наверняка знаете хорошо. Ни одного дюйма на восток, сказали нам в 90-е годы. Ну и чего? Надули. Просто нагло обманули. 5...
NATO. What's going on, big guy? You just expanded eastward. NATO, we're talking about eastward expansion here. You just did it. I watched you do it. So we'll go through the historical timeline of what he's talking about right now, but at least some of us are surprised, for lack of a better description, at how rational his position is. It makes perfect sense to me. I don't know what you guys think, but he's correct.
Yeah, you haven't bought into Russian propaganda at all, John. KR Goss says, just so you know, we can't read all the subtitles with the new setup. All you need to know is basically he said, hey, I think NATO is gonna be too close to us. Stop it, or we're gonna do something.
On the history of NATO expansion, he's got the timeline right, he's got the details right. I can't find too much wrong with it, but it's also important to note that our society especially is susceptible to being misled because of how central technology is to our lives. Everybody is constantly plugged in. Everything is always passed through this hyper-consensus filter now. It's basically the greatest system for distributing propaganda that the world has ever seen. And things like...
That's why you have a job, John. Lily Love Stuff says, honestly, what would John Doyle say or do if Mexico invaded Texas? Because Texas used to be a part of Mexico, and there are a number of people of Mexican descent living in Texas. He would care about that. Guys, again, John is being disingenuous here. He doesn't believe what he's saying. He's saying whatever he feels he needs to do to further what he believes to be an appropriate agenda for his ends.
Literally just get memory hold now. Like, people do not remember things at all anymore. They simply just update themselves to whatever is currently the good thing to support, so as to try to gain status by being the most caring about the current thing. Like, never forget that these people were viciously hateful towards unvaccinated people. They were calling for medical segregation. They were double
fuck you.
masking and
If you're gonna go ahead and make people in danger, you're bad? You're a bad person.
cars. Now they hate Russians. They're wearing Ukrainian flags. They're calling for no-fly zones. It's literally all and only because the screen people told them so. Like,
Or, again, invading sovereign nations is bad, okay? Sky Comet Fallen says cleanse for later. Thank you.
these are not real people. These are dangerous. And as we'll discuss later, whenever they hate Russians or truck drivers or unvaccinated people or Trump voters, that is all them casting different versions of you. They hate you. They hate anything that is in opposition to the global libtard menace because they have been made so miserable by this system. They've outsourced all sense of purpose to hedonistic pleasure.
Or, John, I don't like people who literally want me dead. Probably that one.
And a manufactured victim status. And if you in any way threaten that, maybe you're against this part of it or against just this part of it, it doesn't matter. You are the enemy. And they make this abundantly clear to you. Again, as we'll get into, but yeah, our country is stupid enough to like literally not know the last 30 years of history, which Putin is referencing there. And they would rather buy into wartime propaganda for their own reasons. And you're always going to have this problem in a technologically advanced society, but it really could be mitigated to a significant degree if we just had good people reigning in education and reigning in media in this country. But anyways, let's actually explain why all this is happening in Ukraine now. Let's provide the historical context here. So everyone's calling this Putin's war. They're saying that Putin is the aggressor here, and this is
He literally is.
easy to sell to people.
Again, countries voluntarily joining NATO, regardless of your opinions on NATO, is not in any way equivalent to Russia invading a nation which, by the way, wasn't going to join NATO anyway. NATO doesn't take countries that are actively involved in military conflict, and they considered the Crimea invasion an ongoing conflict. Ukraine was not eligible to become part of NATO.
Because yes, Putin.
Lily Love Stuff says, I have a Ukrainian flag up right now because I'm supporting Kalush Orchestra at Eurovision this year, and Ukraine is regularly in my top 10. I also have a Slovenian and Lithuanian flag up in my house right now, and I'm waiting on a San Marins one.
Did invade Ukraine, but as we'll explain, the
Lily Love Stuff, thanks for gifting 5 tier 1 subs.
United States and NATO have purposefully transformed Ukraine into a weapon against Putin, and if this is true, which it is, then the blood would be on their hands, not Putin's, because he would
The whole reason they wanted to join NATO was because of Crimea? I know, but it's also what prevented them from being able to join NATO.
be acting in self-defense. And because our media is covering it in the way that they are, and because people's historical knowledge is like literally just World War II and then maybe slavery and the civil rights movement, like that's literally all they know about, which is why Godwin's law correctly observes that any discussion online in the new public square, that is, will eventually lead to Hitler comparisons in a long enough timeline, inexorably. They won't even throw,
Especially in a John Doyle video, you know, since he's friends with Nick Fuentes. And we know what a big fan of Hitler Nick Fuentes is.
in a Stasi reference, an NKVD reference. It's always just Hitler because that's the only thing people know how to talk about. Maybe in a way he'll actually end up getting his 1,000 years since no one will shut up about him. You gotta let that Hitler jerk out of your head. You know, he's living in there rent-free, but they can only conceptualize what's happening as Russia is invading another country for no reason, since that's what they were taught about World War II with Germany invading Poland. And so it makes sense that in the mind of a typical person, what they're being told is World War III will start similarly with a country just invading another country for no reason when properly understood. It's not exactly an invasion in the traditional sense, but more so a defensive move against NATO.
Again, which is literally what he's literally saying, don't bring up Hitler, but also, I'm gonna use the same defense Hitler did. Hitler also said it was a defensive move against Poland.
which of course is a powerful alliance of neighboring countries. But let's see if that's true. Let's see if America and NATO are actually the good guys.
We defensively invaded a sovereign nation. Genius. Got a regular George W. Bush over here.
Or if they're actually just repeating their historical pattern of kicking the dog and then shooting it when it bites. And really, I guess it does make sense for Putin to be crazy if you're going to absolutely like refuse to concede any wrongdoing on the part of your country or of your government, because this man has straight up chosen a high-risk confrontation against the globalist American empire. He's risking hundreds of billions of dollars, the lives of his men, the stability of his own government, his own life possibly, and for what? Just to invade his neighbor? So what does that make him? Is he a calculated political actor like myself, or is he a villain from a Saturday morning cartoon?
He's a political actor who made a miscalculation. The only options aren't calculated and cartoon villain. He can think he's calculated and make a miscalculation and not be a cartoon villain. Nernindia Abel says, why do people accuse me of being a Nazi just because I think Hitler did nothing wrong?
Or like a Marvel movie. It is no wonder to me that a population which has to change its underwear every time Marvel makes the same superhero movie year after year is all of a sudden casting that psychological conditioning onto global politics. The point being that our government knows that it absolutely cannot acknowledge any wrongdoing or responsibility for this on its end, because if it does, well, then that opens up some tricky cans of worms into how our national security operations exist in Ukraine. Maybe some foreign investments, maybe some corruption, maybe some laundering, maybe some trafficking, maybe some other things, but namely our involvement in two separate...
Dog whistling towards the QAnon people. H. Baird says, I love how right-wing people abandon all sense of agency. Every bad thing they do are things they had no choice on.
Coups, which both involved Ukraine, one of which was in 2014 pertaining to their governments, and the other was in 2016 pertaining to our government. So that's why the Saturday morning cartoon narrative is just being pumped out. Like, virtually everything, our actions, Putin's actions, the historical context.
Tweelum, thanks for gifting 5 tier 1 subs.
Everything suggests that there's something bigger going on here that our government is trying to suppress, and so they just counter that by, well, he's a madman, he'll kill us all. And then the masses are like, like, it's not just that they're disinterested in knowing the truth, but that they are actually hostile towards you if you don't just buy into the propaganda.
Straw man.
But anyways, let's wind the clocks back here. You might remember for the longest time, Ukraine was called the Ukraine, right? Now,
here's the part where he tries to delegitimize the sovereignty of Ukraine.
Recently, they've dropped that because it alludes to the reality of the situation that they're trying to suppress, which is that Ukraine is basically not a real country.
And what do you mean by that, John? It literally is a country. It's a sovereign nation. They voted to be sovereign years and years and years ago after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they've been operating as an independent sovereign nation for years. Imagine if the UK somehow tried to invade the US and said, well, they're not even really a country. They used to belong to us.
Now,
they used to be called the colonies, but they stopped calling themselves that and started calling themselves the United States. But they're not really a country.
I'll explain to you why that is, but I'm not really interested in doing that for 3 reasons. One,
because you're unable and incapable of defending that argument. I agree. I gotta pee real quick. Keep watching, John. I can hear him. I'll respond to things when I come back. I just gotta pee.
I don't feel like it. 2, it isn't really relevant to the discussion, which we'll explain. And 3, nobody who's making an argument for the sovereignty of Ukraine would ever make an argument for the sovereignty of the United States. Ever, never, not ever. So it's not even worth your time. They don't care about sovereignty. They care about virtue signaling. Republicans wouldn't give Trump $4 billion to secure the southern border, but they just voted to send $14 billion to Ukraine. John will remember that. But the reason it was called the Ukraine for so long is because it's much more of a territory than it is a country. And Ukraine, by the way, literally translates in Ukrainian, which is so similar to Russian that they're often mistaken to be different dialects of the same language. It literally translates to borderland. And if you're going to be the borderland between two competing powers, which are the European Union and NATO to the west, and then Russia to the east, your geopolitical strategy so as to avoid getting swallowed up by one of them is going to be to maintain neutrality with both of them at worst, amicability with both of them at best, but you can't.
Okay, John comparing people immigrating from the southern border to a, again, literal invasion with tanks and missiles, hilarious. But also, John, one of the reasons that Trump couldn't get money for a border wall is because that would be ineffective even against what you consider to be illegal immigration. So,
can't take sides, but they have, because Ukraine's corrupt ruling class has allowed their country to become a pawn for the globalist American empire and NATO. And practically speaking, it's not its own country because it is essentially a client state of the United States.
It's a sovereign nation. John is literally trying to downplay invading a country. Cult of Cautious Optimism says, maybe I'm missing something. I accept John as a grifter, so why is he going to die on the hill for Putin? He's incredibly unpopular, even in some right-wing circles at this point. This seems like a bad, calculated choice in the short and long. Honestly, I don't want to express my opinion on this. I don't. I think John has ulterior motives, and also, I think they like a strong man. I think he envies the fact that Russia has basically a right-wing dictator in Putin, and he wishes the same for the United States. He sees Russia as a model for what he wants the United States to be.
And our country has used them to attack the enemies of the regime, both foreign and domestic. And this is important because it's not just that NATO has been expanding eastward towards Russia throughout the last 30 years, but that the country that would be bordered with Russia is particularly under the influence of the globalist American empire. And yes, that poses a
dog whistle.
Very serious threat.
Every time he says globalist, it's the fucking dog whistle.
To the national security of Russia. Ukraine should have acted as a buffer zone.
Oh no, international cooperation!
But instead, they were used to forward the interests of the globalist American empire, and Russia understood correctly that it was only a matter of time before Ukraine was directly weaponized against them, and so they had to show the world that, for lack of a better term, they're not screwing around. And because our regime is spiritually female, they are incapable of understanding.
You just channeled Jordan Peterson for a second.
This type of display. We'll get into that more in a second, but just know that it's not just about the borders, but that Putin finds the relationship between the globalist American empire and Ukraine to be genuinely threatening because, of course, for the last 20 years or so, we've used Ukraine to try to destabilize Russia and specifically to target Putin. And now the dog finally bites, and now we finally got people saying aloud what they've been maneuvering for a very long time now, which is regime change in Russia, taking out.
It's almost like the president should change every once in a while and not be a dictator. Weird. Mezzy Star, thanks for 8 months.
Putin, etc. So then, okay, the question is, why do they want Putin gone? What's the problem with Russia? Why?
He's a dictator? That's pretty bad.
Why do they want it destabilized? Why do they want regime change? Regime change, which could end the world. Oh, what's that? The world's ending? So why would you not want to at least go out in comfort, in style, and in celebration of whatever is left of American masculinity? How can you do that, you ask? Have I ever steered you wrong? Have I ever missed? No. Okay? It's simple. You toss out your overpriced, testosterone-killing polyester boxers, throw them into a fire, get yourself a drawer full of Undertech. The only box...
How much of right-wing talking points are fueled by an insecurity about their own masculinity? Seems very strange.
Action guaranteed or your money back. That's getundertack.com. Offer code Doyle20. Very epic. We continue. So really, why do they want Russia destabilized? Why do they want regime change, Putin gone, etc.? Also important, hold that thought. Some more context with Ukraine because, of course, they'll tell you that Ukraine is our ally. They're a bastion of freedom and democracy. This is just not the case. That country is thoroughly corrupted. But let's talk about the first coup in 2014 in Kiev. Notice how they're calling it Kyiv now. It's Kiev. It's always been Kiev. But anyways, in 2014, the Obama administration backed a soft coup in Kiev called the Color Revolution, which toppled a Russia-friendly government in the name of democracy and who we are. And it did this by artificially coordinating mass street demonstrations and chaos through social media. Ring a bell? So Putin responds in 2014 by annexing Crimea. It's ethnically Russian. He secured his port access. Obama hit him with some sanctions, etc. Did we stop? No. We doubled down. We tried using Ukraine to provide Slavic legitimacy to the whole Trump-Russia lie that everybody believed a few years ago because the regime saw a threat in Donald Trump, and so it tried to prevent him from being elected to the presidency. And Ukraine played a role in that. So we support a coup to take out a Russia-sympathetic government in the capital city. We install a pro-Western government that bans speaking Russian in public. They allow neo-Nazi militias to wreak havoc in the ethnically Russian parts of the country.
That's cute that John's going to pretend to be against neo-Nazis.
Then in 2018, Ukraine ends the strategic partnership that it had with Russia, say that they want to join NATO. And then Russia doesn't want this, of course, because if Ukraine is in NATO, then NATO can place missiles and troops on the border that it has with Russia instead of...
J.I. Loss says, aren't all right-wing views either based on defending or spreading masculine insecurity? Feels like it to me.
Just having a neutral zone in between, which is what Putin wants. And that's why when people say, oh, well, this wouldn't have happened under Trump, that's true, but it's not just because Trump was like a strong and respected leader, but also that he would have just told Ukraine that they just can forget about NATO membership, and then Putin would have said like, oh, okay, sick. So
this wouldn't have happened if Trump was in charge, because he would have given Putin exactly what he wanted. Do you think that's a flex, John?
why is that
Putin had to go and murder people and commit war crimes because he didn't get what he wanted.
reasonable? Why do you have to be a madman who's gone mad with power if you want there to be just some distance between your border and like missiles? This was the whole problem with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like the Soviets wanted to put missiles in Cuba, right? Literally the same thing, except we're trying to put missiles in Ukraine that could reach Moscow. Russia's not doing this to us now, but we promised Russia that we would not advance NATO eastward, not an inch to the east, we said. But throughout the late 1990s and
Russia also promised not to invade Ukraine. How'd that go?
until now, we've done exactly that. And when Russia's
Trump would have 100% Chamberlain to this.
asked us, hey, you know, maybe we could join NATO too, we spat in their face, which implies that NATO, which in itself is outdated and pointless, does that.
Why is neutrality an unreasonable proposal? Because I'm not in charge of Ukraine and it's not my job to tell them what to do? If the Ukrainian government elected by its people wants to join NATO, that's their business. Not mine, not yours, and not Putin's? You seem very, very, like, insistent on this, and I don't know why.
Actually have a purpose, a bad one, but still, which is just to antagonize, destabilize, and eventually topple Russia. That's why they've been expanding eastward towards Russia. That's why they've been integrating formerly Soviet states into NATO. And that's why we've like digitally carpet bombed the masses with anti-Russian propaganda. Like, in what other way is it possible to interpret this if not as aggression from us? But again, there's absolutely no acknowledgement of everything that led up to this completely predictable occurrence, so predictable that even Biden predicted it back in 1997, which I'll show you right now. But there's no acknowledgement of the coup in 2014, the wars in the ethnically Russian parts of the country, the decades of NATO expansion eastward, despite promising not to, the little geopolitical games and antagonizations, literally laughing at their request to join NATO. But no, it's just a madman who just wants to take over the world. Really? Even Biden understood this. Take a look.
I think the one place where the greatest consternation would be caused in the short term for admission, having nothing to do with the merit and preparedness of the country to come in, would be to admit the Baltic states now in terms of NATO-Russian, U.S.-Russian relations. And if there was ever anything that was going to tip the balance, were it to be tipped in terms of a vigorous and hostile reaction, I don't mean military, in Russia, it would be that.
Yeah, literally.
We learned no new information in the last 25 years, by the way. It's been a quarter century since he said that. But nothing has changed in the quarter century since that clip. Trust us, guys. Speedy Yoshi says, cleanse for later. Thank you. Tucker White says, let's see. John, Russia invaded Ukraine because it wants to give money to Russian oligarchs who actually call the shots. Also, it wants economic cock to be larger than America's.
If we start admitting Baltic states into NATO, Russia's going to get cheesed. And we do it anyway, and exactly as predicted, we're dealing with this now. And it's not because Putin is crazy and insane and a bad guy, just like in the movies. And it's not even because he's paranoid or even like driven by this desire to restore the glory of the USSR or whatever. It's because of the last few decades, and in particular the last 10 years, of Western efforts to accelerate their aggression towards Russia through Ukraine. Of course, timed opportunistically to coincide with the domestic instability of the United States and the ascension of allied countries like China, which is a whole other thing. Now, Putin is very open about this. He's explained this over and over again for years, and we're like shocked to see that he's actually doing what he said he would do. And since it would seem to me that he more or less has an actual case and is relatively justified in his actions, we can't argue with him. So instead we rely on appeals to emotion through propaganda. That's why if you turn on the news, you don't see anything even approximating an intelligence argument, a historical analysis. No, it's all footage designed to make you feel sad. And because we don't have a case, we have to do that. Our leadership is incompetent. I mean, did you like watch that clip of him? Can you imagine a Western leader speaking to an audience with that level of intelligence, as if his country and the world are composed of intelligence and relatively educated adults instead of children? You can do that in illiberal countries, since you don't have to pander to the lowest common denominator and the emotions of women and effeminate men. You can just speak normally.
God, John has a hard-on for dictatorships.
And people who care will...
I think the best argument for why Russia is wrong is that John supports them. Just make someone watch this video and see the kind of person and the ideology of a person who supports Putin, and you automatically get them to side with Ukraine.
Listen, and people who don't just won't. But because our country is politically correct, you can't do that. Hey, if you're anti-political correctness, let's see if you're against it enough to acknowledge that the only reason it exists is to cater to the emotions of women and men who act like women. Like, serious countries don't have to worry about this because they'll still acknowledge that women tend to be governed by their emotions. And not coincidentally, it's women who are really in support of us getting involved in this war because the emotional propaganda worked on their brains disproportionately. Fancy that. But since testosterone...
That's a lot of words for I hate women. Good job, John. Lily Love Stuff says, I would love to get 5 minutes of time with John Doyle. I know I could make him cry.
Testosterone is down 40% in the last few decades. It's working on men too. And so now we've got almost 50% across the board in terms of support for us getting involved in this war. And we've just lost our minds. Like, I think we're just tired and want to die, honestly. Like, there's no 9/11. There's no Pearl Harbor type scenario. We just got humiliated in Afghanistan. And the general population is like 1 or 2 reminders that war is generally tragic away from just greenlighting another catastrophic episode of Captain America fights for pride parades throughout the world, but this time against a nuclear power. And why? Because Russia wants to be left alone by that, and because they seem to be uniting regions of ethnically Russian people with the Russian state.
Oh, we're doing that again. That's literally also a... He really doesn't want people to compare him to Hitler, but he keeps using Hitler arguments. We're just bringing ethnically German people together. Next, he's gonna fucking cite Lebensraum. H-Baird says, I too miss leaders talking to us with intelligence.
People like me from previous months, okay? Total control. Bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing, bing. You know what that is, right?
Makes me want to...
Which of course makes no sense to the class of people who believes that a nation is purely an idea. It's propositional. It's just an economic zone. Anyone can be an American, but can anyone be a Ukrainian? No, they are a...
Yeah, if they move to Ukraine and become a citizen of Ukraine, yeah, countries are like civic entities. What?
Distinct people with a culture and a homeland. They have a right to exist. You're making me angry. We've got all these Ukrainian immigrants now protesting in Detroit, which is a city that was literally founded by my ancestors. Like, I can go down to Hart Plaza and find their names on a plaque because they were in the original founding convoy in 1701 alongside Cadillac. And now in a city that's older than the country in which it resides and that was built by my ancestors, I'm seeing all these Ukrainian immigrants mass protesting about how we need to get America involved in a war to settle their ethnic grudges. Right. Everybody's an American until the
Yeah, you should just be an ethno-nationalist right now.
ethnic grudges come to a head. And then we see where the allegiance truly lies, right? They're an American when they want to ditch their country to come participate in our decadent society, but then they maneuver to try to drag us into foreign wars, which will take lives and money away from American families. So, with no disrespect intended, go do it yourself. You want to start World War III? All right, let's reinstitute the draft, but only for those whose families got here after World War II. And then we'll see how American everybody really is.
Wowzers! That's a lot of fucking shit. J.I. Law says, John is only just now realizing that countries are social constructs. And Sky Comet Fallen says, stop coming with other men's dicks, John. You aren't your ancestors. I'm just gonna... This is just a link to this video in case you want it for, like, any reason.
I have deep roots in this country. And if me wanting to put my country first is offensive to you, we've learned a lot about to where your allegiance is actually pledged, haven't we? You should be kissing the soil that this country is built upon, not demanding its people leave and go die on your soil when they have no reason to.
Tucker White says, America doing shit because common low testosterone.
hell does this have to do with anything? Tell me what's happening!
But I guess it's not entirely their fault. How are they supposed to believe in America when we don't even believe in America anymore? And again, the needle points back to our leadership, right? These people have destroyed everything that the American flag was supposed to represent. Everyone always makes fun of the right, and me especially, for holding the 1950s in such high esteem. And it's like, yeah, if you showed someone from the 1950s what the 2020s are like...
I don't give a shit what people from the 1950s think, John. They're either dead or fucking racist. I don't give a shit. If you showed people from the 1950s, yeah, they'd probably have an aneurysm that there are water fountains that anyone can drink out of. I don't give a fuck. Why in the world do you think I care what they think?
They would be absolutely terrified. It would be a dystopian hell to them. The people are fat, they're strung out on drugs, everybody's eating highly processed foods. All of a sudden, there's a market for selling...
As opposed to the 1950s, when everyone ate vegetables encased in aspic, which is much better for you.
Digestive drugs and erectile dysfunction drugs to young people.
I don't know how to tell you this, John, but I've watched on Public Domania, which is another show we do on this channel, where I watch old stuff from like the 50s and 60s, basically from the 30s to the 70s. Those old shows, every single one has a goddamn laxative commercial. So people in the 20th century, holy shit, were their shits dry. Okay, so let's not act like drugs for people are a new thing. Marcus Drake says, okay, Hannah, but what would Strom Thurmond think?
Because their bodies aren't responding well to the literal poison that they're eating every day. Everywhere you go, everything you do, tracked, recorded, it's in a database somewhere. I saw someone say this recently. Imagine what would happen if you got into a bar fight in another state as recently as 1980 and you didn't have your driver's license. You could simply refuse to identify yourself and they'd be like, well, you have no concept of what it means to be truly...
Wait, does he think if you committed a crime in another state in the 80s and you didn't have your driver's license, they'd just be like, well, you can go. This is a fucking sovereign citizen stream? How does he think this works? What? You'd go to jail! Anti-Pretzel says, this guy keeps comparing Putin to a movie or cartoon villain when he doesn't seem to grasp how much more complicated literally everything in politics actually is. We do not have the whole story, just what we're being told. I mean, that's literally what he's saying. He's just saying it from a terrible perspective where he's siding with Putin. War is a lot more complicated than just side A and side B are fighting. The world is a lot more complicated than this myopic view of it all. John, get the F out of the basement, touch grass, and shut the F up about shit you do not understand. Lily Love Stuff says, if I showed my relatives from the 50s what America is like now, they would be horrified by why everyone is still racist as F and why things haven't progressed. F, my uncle, literally moved from the US to Germany in the 50s because they treated him better over there.
Really off the grid. You have no concept of what that kind of freedom tastes like. I bet it tastes better than smartphones. I bet it tastes better than paying 25% markup for drive-through food so you can sit on your ass and wait for it to be delivered. Never underestimate the human willing...
Then don't get DoorDash and don't eat fast food. What? No one's making you buy fucking DoorDash, John. What are you talking about?
Is to sacrifice objective well-being at the altar of convenience. Blockbuster, a great example of this. It is time for the introduction to Blockbuster protectionism video. The nostalgia for the 1950s is more or less rooted in what a fundamentally good...
Does John think Blockbuster video is better than streaming services? Don't get me wrong, you know, I was around in the 90s, so I also have nostalgia for video stores, and I, enjoy the idea of walking around a video store again because it's nostalgic. But video stores are objectively a worse way to watch movies than a streaming service.
Society looks like when it's blessed with prosperity, but with ill-managed prosperity comes decadence. Same thing with the 1990s. That nostalgia is more or less rooted in what a country looks like when technology begins its integration into the mainstream. Like, oh, it's fun, look at this, wow, I'm choosing...
John, everyone is nostalgic about their childhood. I'd imagine we'll be getting the early 2000s nostalgia pretty hard in the next 5 years. Then after that, in the next decade, we'll get 2010s nostalgia. Nostalgia kind of works in 20-year cycles. Like in the 90s, people were nostalgic for the 70s. In the 70s, people were nostalgic for the 50s, a la things like Happy Days or American Graffiti. Like, this is not a new concept, John. Stone Corbell says, John, old thing good, new thing bad, literally just pandering to boomers. Worse, he's pandering to zoomers who think like boomers because they're so, oh god, why am I blanking? Because they're so misanthropic that they hate the entire world and themselves and think that it's not something to do with their own defects and void that they have in their personality in life, but has to do with something missing fundamentally from the world and culture in which they live. They're blaming everything around them instead of having any sort of introspection whatsoever. Meek says, we already are getting 2000s nostalgia, Turning Red as an example. I haven't seen it yet. So. Lady Paradox says, how dare you, John? I just got DoorDash and it's great. It's funny, too, because normally right-wingers would be like, oh, yes, the free market has decided that things like DoorDash are a good thing. But John Doyle isn't that kind of right-winger. He's a authoritarian dictatorship kind of right-winger. So.
Choosing to play Kid Picks. I'm choosing to play N64. I'm choosing to do whatever. Now it's like we are literal slaves to technology. Literal slaves. And there's no practical
But what if phone bad?
answer to this problem, because again, we can never underestimate the human willingness to sacrifice objective well-being at the altar of convenience. Not to go Jordan Peterson mode, but it really is the archetypal bargain, right? Like every fairy tale ever, your life is boring, you want something more exciting, you're introduced to this cool new thing. It seems so good at first, but then it takes control of you, and there's no turning back from that point. Alice in Wonderland, Coraline, like I mean, this isn't good. And of course, we needed technology to optimize human potential, increase productivity, limitless capability. People aren't more productive, though. They just use technology to zone out. They use it to order food and stare at the...
No, actually, in terms of, like, actual economic success, productivity has gone up a lot over the years. It's just that the benefits of said productivity have been pushed upwards towards the top of the pyramid of the economy, towards the 1%. But people are absolutely more productive.
The screen, so that they can eat garbage while staring at the screen.
Like, even just in terms of my personal life, like, I had to renew a prescription and do some banking and stuff, and I'm able to do that easily with my phone now. It allows me to be more productive. I can do things without having to go out to the bank. Therefore, I have more free time to do other things that I'd like to do. That's basic, John. Again, maybe this is because John's younger than me. I don't know. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. John is a bit younger than me, so the internet was already kind of a thing when he started, coming of age. I do remember a time before the internet, and the internet and computers, as integrated into our lives, well, they have created a lot of issues. I think people like John Doyle are one of those issues. It's allowed really bad people to congregate and share ideas, ethno-nationalism, conspiracy theories, sovereign citizens, all sorts of terrible things. Yes, those things are bad, but you also can't discount the fact that this technology has allowed us to spread information, unfortunately, as well as disinformation, incredibly quickly. It has increased productivity. It has allowed people to do careers that they never would have been able to in the past, John Doyle and myself being examples, respectively. People on Etsy, people on eBay, people on to OnlyFans or whatever other site, people use for that kind of thing. Like, people all the time use the internet and technology to be able to be more productive in their lives. That's fine.
When's the last time you ate a meal without staring at a screen? When's the last time you went one day without looking at a screen? It's always been understood that life is a cycle, and that to...
What if it was like I don't know. What if it was like sometime after the introduction of the novel, right? People reading books, and imagine someone being like, when's the last time you enjoyed your evening in the candlelight without reading one of those trashy novels? Stop reading and tell stories around the fire like our ancestors. Like, that's fine. It's fine. It's fine to read. It's fine to watch things. It's whatever, John.
Live forever is as equally tragic as to die prematurely, since the meaning of it, and of all things, comes from scarcity and uniqueness, right? But there's no scarcity and there's no uniqueness in a completely interconnected, syndicated, mass-marketed, hedonistic, and nihilistic society, because they've sacrificed meaning for pleasure. And since they have no meaning, they fear death, because...
Again, these are all just really old, arguments saying that humanity has lost something fundamental because of new technology. This has existed all the way back to the time of, oh god, who am I thinking of? Socrates, right? When he's like, oh, the written word will corrupt the youth because they'll no longer have to remember things. They can just write it down. This idea of technology corrupting the human spirit in some way, I understand where that anxiety comes from. I understand that anxiety is a pretty fundamental part of the human experience because we are a species that continually grows and changes and innovates. So we always are facing anxieties of new inventions, new modalities of our own existence, whether it's in entertainment or productivity at work or whatever, and there's always an anxiety about what that's going to mean for who we are as a species, as a country, as people, whatever. But at the end of the day, On the whole, technology's been an amazing thing, and it's what's allowed us to thrive as a species, John. Your arguments aren't new. They're as old as human civilization. You just sound like... You sound like an asshole, basically. Ultra Peak says, back to the roots.
If all life is the acquisition of pleasure, then the end of that is terrifying. They don't know God because God has rules, and rules by definition constrain one's desires, right? And so they don't have meaning, and so they fear death. They don't view life as anything more...
For the record, I don't fear death, John. Death is an inevitability. Everyone will die someday. I will die someday. Could be tomorrow. Could be 5 minutes from now. Could be 80 years from now. Who knows? Don't know. Doesn't matter. I'm going to do my best in living my life, enjoying my life, not excessively so to the point where I am, like, debauched or whatever. But yes, I'm going to try and enjoy my life and spend time with my loved ones, enrich it for myself and others. And that's about it. Do my best for myself and to help other people. Whatever. That's fine. That's not a bad thing. Not afraid of death.
More significant than like a checklist with all the things they want to do on the checklist. And so the anxiety is rooted in the
Stone Corbell says, I honestly don't believe John really believes in the religious stuff he espouses. It's just rhetoric. It's possible. I find him to be disingenuous about basically everything. I think John has specific things that he wants, and he will say anything in service of those goals. So he believes in ethno-nationalism, ending democracy, ending women's rights, and, like, making LGBT people all go back in the closet or die. And I think he will do anything that he thinks is in service of those core beliefs. I don't believe a single word he ever says is genuine, as much as it's just rhetoric he is using to try and sway conversations and political movements towards the ends that he has in mind with his goals. J.I. Lost says, music has really gone downhill since the kids started listening to all those synthesizers and electric guitars. Anti-Pretzel says, young man yells at cloud, news and following link. Narnandia Owl says, just means we should try to do something with the time we have. Immortality would defeat the whole point. Tucker White says, Hannah on stream, I fear no death. Hannah off camera. Wake me up inside. Wake me up inside. That's good. Stone Corbell says, the only things he says that are genuine are when he's joking. Yeah. I'm gonna play this while I pee real quick. Sorry, I've been drinking a lot of water, so I have to urinate again.
I'm gonna sit in the snow-covered bench. Holy smokes! Oh my god! Yes! 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 I'm wall-to-wall raccoons. You ready? Let's go. Oh my god. This is crazy. This is crazy. You know, there's got to be 30 raccoons at least. I don't know where they all come from. Oh my god. Yeah, they all love me. Because I got the food. Yeah, and I got Buddy hanging off me. Yeah. Here you go. Ready? Here you go. There you go. Are things settling down? I got 8 pounds of hot dogs here in this bucket. Woo! Things are settled down. Finally. Holy smokes. Yeah. I gotta get 2 hands going here. Yeah, they're all, you know, I'll tell you, see, they're really, really super hungry because of the cold. And it's -6 here right now, Celsius. So it's below freezing. There we go.
Cute. Alright, back to John Doyle's bullshit. Don't worry, guys. We only have an hour left of his video.
Basic economic principle of the limited time against the limitless potential of the checklist. All the things I want to do. But in actuality, it's that fear of death that has led to the normalization of the most tragic lifestyles, such that now death at any stage would be a victory, almost a liberation of some sort. How can a premature death be a tragedy if there's no longer the maturation which is implied?
What kind of weird nihilistic bullshit is he talking about?
By the idea of premature, right? People now live in the eternal present. They live in the moment. Live and let live, man. Do what makes you happy. If it feels good, do it, man, which has made them more miserable than ever. And ironically, it suggests that a younger death is more desirable since on paper it means less time spent in slavery.
What the fuck is he talking about?
To oneself. These people reject God. They reject God's calling for us to be husbands and wives and fathers and mothers, and they tell them,
John, your beliefs are fine. I mean, they're not. The ethno-nationalist ones especially. But if you're religious and you want to be like a husband and a father and have a very traditional life, that's fine. Go do that. I'm happy for you. If you can find someone who wants that with you, awesome. No one is stopping you from that. Great. Go do it.
Themselves, well, it's because I've got all these things I just have to do. Oh, they've got their checklist. And yet these people more or less just spend their time participating in behaviors that destroy themselves. They're not going to the Coliseum. They're not composing a symphony or perhaps like a potential soundtrack to accompany a novel that they enjoy. Their entire consciousness is just different.
Your life is worthless unless you write a symphony. John Doyle, 2022.
Practical manifestations of sloth, lust, gluttony, pride, envy, wrath, and greed. How does this relate to what we're talking about? It doesn't exactly, but it is true that people have to believe in themselves if they're going to believe in their country. And that means they have to believe in their unique value and their unique purpose as God's child, but also in their unique value and purpose as a country. And those are not mutually exclusive. Not individualism, not collectivism, organic unity, which is what we used to have in this country back when we were the most free and the most prosperous. So, yes.
Again, the imaginary time he sees in his head or when he watches Leave It to Beaver on TV Land.
Technology has been used as a tool to sedate and basically distract the masses and syndicate propaganda at a level that would have been the wet dream of a 20th century dictator. But even then, the core of our problem is still that our leadership has destroyed every righteous prospect of the American patriot. They've destroyed our economy, they've destroyed the American dream, they've destroyed our cities, they've destroyed much of our scenery, they've stripped our rights away from us,
The people who ship jobs off are capitalists, John. If you don't like the fact that jobs have been shipped overseas in order to take advantage and exploit low-wage labor from countries with fewer labor laws, then you should be mad at capitalists, not whatever you're mad at.
Humiliated us repeatedly. They've insulted us. They've insulted our history. They've robbed us of more money than we'll ever even know or understand. They've given it away to their friends. They've pissed the rest of it away just to mock us. And then when they finally tell us there's a flag that we can care about, it's the flag that represents a country that was established so recently that even my dad can go, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. Go to hell. No,
John, if you like America, like America. I'm not a fan of a lot of the things America does. I'm not a fan of right-wing stuff in America. I'm not a fan of how right economically America is. However, there are things about America that I love. I love that I'm able to come out as trans. I love that I'm able to get HRT and stuff. I love that I'm able to marry my fiance. I love that I'm able to do this job. There are many things that I love about America. That's great. I'm not telling you you can't like things about America, John. Unfortunately, the things you like about America are imaginary depictions of what you think the 1950s were like, and not about any sort of material reality that has ever or does currently exist. So I don't really know what you're in it for. Honestly, on an objective level, I think I'm probably more patriotic than you by the definition, John, because I can point out things about America that I like. What do you like about America, John? It doesn't seem like you like anything except the imaginary concept of America you have in your head. You hate Americans, you hate women being able to vote, you hate liberal democracy, you hate the fact that you think 95% of people in the country are brain dead, quote, NPCs, so you certainly don't respect or like the people in the country. What do you like about America, John?
We get to control our destiny too, and our destiny will once again be our own, and your destiny will be facing justice for what you've done to the world. But these people are so narcissistic and so possessed by hubris that they would rather blow up the world before they die so it doesn't go on without them. That's how developed their main character complex is. And since we're an empire in decline, which, I mean, we all agree.
So it's cartoonish to say Putin is just a crazy person, but when John says American politicians and media empires are cartoonish villains with some sort of, like, suicide complex, That's completely rational. Genius.
Agree with that, right? We're on our decline. Hey, don't beat yourself up about it, big guy. It's perfectly natural. It happens to all of us, you know. But maybe there's some poetic justice to be found in that our decline is somewhat similar to what destroyed the British Empire, which of course we declared independence from about 250 years ago. Because if you look at what basically destroyed the British Empire, it could be reduced essentially to two things: free trade and interventionism. And there was a celebrated British historian by the name of A.G.P. Taylor, and he once said something to the effect of, though the object of being a great power is to fight a great war, the only way to remain a great power is to avoid one. World War II inarguably destroyed the British Empire. Like, that was the final nail in the coffin. And if you look at what made America great, ignoring the fact that we were able to be the back-to-back World War champs because we avoided getting involved for longer than any other developed country, which is how we were able to walk away more or less unscathed.
Oh, he said an accurate thing.
We were built and made strong by protectionism and
Stone Corbell says he likes that he thinks he can make it into a white ethno-state eventually. He should just move to a country that's different than this one then. He could go move to Russia.
Interventionism. Globalization killed the British Empire, and it's killing America now. Like, there's this myth of America being built by, like, total free trade because international finance and capital literally lobbied to put that into your mind. But if you look at, like, Mount Rushmore, for example, every man on that mountain was a protectionist. And I don't need to read a bunch of, like, economic theory to...
Didn't he say that the left is emotional, but he's citing a fucking mountain with presidents' heads on it for what he thinks is good governance?
Know that in brass text, production equals prosperity. We're like scratching our heads that we've got this multi-trillion-dollar nanny state and welfare system. We're like 25 trillion in debt. We base our whole economy on debt, usury, fractional reserve banking, middle management, the laptop class, and service in like gigs. And we're like, wait a minute, why is China winning? Their economy is based on advanced manufacturing, production, market economies. Now, hold on a second. The State Department told me they're communists. The point being that China's winning because their economy is built to function as an economy and not like as this debt trap to benefit the ruling class at the expense of the American people. Well, John, you sound like a leftist. No, you misunderstand. I don't want to take money away from business owners. That's fake and gay. And even worse, it's un-American. But a serious country whose ruling class were exploiting its people like this would maybe, I don't know, seize some assets from some people who got their wealth by destroying our country. And I don't know, maybe use them to subsidize the mass deportations of illegal aliens. I don't know. Hey, I'm just throwing out ideas. I like ideas. I'm a real idea.
Again, just describing fascism and creating an ethno-state with said fascism. Awesome.
Yes, guy. I'm Dave Rubin. That's why these companies, you know, they're siding with China. People like to say, well, companies are...
Sky Come Up Fallen says... Yeah, probably anti-Semitism, too. Sky Come Up Fallen says, John, they want to fight Putin because they think he's going to blow up the world. Also, John, they want to blow up the world. Which is it, John? Do we want to blow up the world or prevent Putin from blowing it up? Your inconsistencies are out of control.
Are being infiltrated by the Chinese. China's the enemy. In actuality, it's the companies choosing to side with China because China's a serious country, which has made clear that in the event that they unequivocally become the dominant global economy, there will be punishments for companies that did not side with them. So if you're a company looking to survive, are you going to side with the country that can't even quite figure out what bathroom it's supposed to be using, or a country that disappeared Jack Ma? There's always going to be an apex of power, and some countries know who's in charge and others have absolutely no clue. My point is just that our ruling class is trying to loot a decaying empire which they've destroyed, and they won't let us do anything about that decay because that would prevent them from looting it. And other countries just don't have to deal with that as much because they're serious. Well, they're tyrannical. We're not. Yeah, I'm in shock and awe that Western media has convinced us all that our system of debt slavery and no greater purpose than...
Again, I don't know why John's a right-winger. He clearly understands that Americans are basically economically enslaved by our shitty, like, economic system. But his goal is instead just ethno-state. Doesn't follow logically.
And being looted while our kids decide to switch genders is actually the righteous system.
And again, he's, like, scapegoating trans people instead of the wealthy for some reason.
It's like societal Stockholm syndrome. The point of all this being that the position of the men who built this country was that America should protect American industry and that America should have no binding pacts to become involved in foreign conflicts. It's almost like we should listen to the men who built this country. We have the user manual. But liberals are prideful. They think that they can like build the Lego set without the instructions. And congratulations, your AT-AT's retarded. Someone said this a while ago. It's so true. Like, we literally spent 50 years fighting the USSR just to become a gayer, more retarded version of it. So back to the central discussion. You've got a Russian government that's saying, okay, we've got Russian people in eastern Ukraine who are being victimized, they're being neglected, they're being terrorized by extremist militias, neo-Nazis, and
Ken, here's a link to this video if you want it, just for whatever reason.
And the Ukrainian government has done nothing about this for almost a decade now. Moreover, Ukraine's maneuvering to join NATO, which would allow NATO to put missiles on Russia's border, which threatens its national security in exactly the same way that it threatened the security of the United States in 1960.
Nandy Owl says, well, you see, Hannah, your position is, quote, fake and gay. Clearly fascism is cool. Kids' way to solve problems.
When the Soviets wanted to put weapons in Cuba. And of course, the icing on the cake is that the US and NATO have broken virtually all of their promises to Russia since the collapse of the USSR, and they absolutely refuse to compromise or meet at the negotiating table. I guess we have to show them we can't allow for this. And our government is saying, well, okay, but, you know, Ukraine, they just want peace and they have a right to exist, which isn't even true, since, as we've covered, their government has completely forced the hand of Russia. Also, being a country 101, you can only exist if you can defend your borders. There's no reason for the U.S. to want to defend the borders of Ukraine, since that has no bearing on the American people. And actually doing so measurably and significantly lowers their quality of life, but it doesn't matter because democracy. Because our values, because who we are, pride parades in Kiev. I'm trying to provide to you an intelligent articulation of how our government is pitching this to us, but they literally outdo like the caricature that I've constructed in my head of them. I'm sure you've seen it already. This is how the Vice President of the United States describes the moral conflict of the Ukraine-Russia
Can we not show Kamala?
situation. This is the level of sophistication that one of the most powerful people in the country is capable of. And please, compare this to the one demonstrated by the crazy, insane bad guy Putin as you watch.
If you're watching any level of news, even social media, you're seeing everything that's going on right now in the Ukraine. Break it down in layman's terms for people who don't understand what's going on and how can this directly affect the people of the United States.
So Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong.
Russia is a big country and Ukraine is a small country, and Russia invaded them, and basically that's not okay. Points for brevity, but you got one part of that.
Yeah, she was asked to put it in layman's
Wrong,
terms.
Madam
I
Vice
agree. But goddamn, she's bad at sound clips, sound bites.
President, which is the part where you said that Ukraine's an actual country. That's a joke because, of course, we're joking, because you actually got that wrong, because you are incapable of transcending the Saturday morning cartoon.
Ukraine is literally a country.
And you really just have to understand the sheer gravity of the spiritually feminine regime. Like, what else would you expect to happen when you intentionally fill the government with people who are higher in openness, which means more susceptible to propaganda, higher in agreeableness, which means more prone to herd mentality and groupthink, and higher in neuroticism, which means more prone to hysterically overreacting to things? What else could have possibly been the results? And the worst part is that the administrators of this regime are far less competent than the class from which they inherited it. Like, they literally are spoiled brats who are too decadent and perverted to be able to correctly perceive reality, and we're all going to suffer because of it. And if you think it's bad now, just wait. But, like, what else did you expect? Can you imagine going back in time to colonial America and trying to argue with a founding father who would have said something to the effect of, women need to literally be oppressed to prevent their chaotic nature from manifesting throughout society? And you'd say, 1, that's mean, and 2, you're an incel. And he'd reply by asking, oh, well, what evidence do you have from your time that contradicts this? And your eyes would glaze over. We have so...
He has a weird fetish for the founding fathers, doesn't he? And, like, old-timey shit. It's all, like, appeals to predecessors, appeals to the past, appeals to dead people, and it's straw man versions of that. It's just very strange.
So much internalized political correctness, which means we have this governor within us that always prevents us, even if only slightly, from correctly interpreting the truth of the world that we live in. Because when you have to alter the truth to be palatable to the emotions of women and men who act like women, then you're not actually telling the truth. And how can you successfully navigate towards the solution if you're not starting from the point of truth? Like, you've got bad charts. And women are getting hysterical about this whole thing. They're finding everything that I've had to say.
John, how many women do you know? Are you literally just talking about your mom Because I don't get the feeling that you talk to many women in real life.
About it, thoroughly off-putting, and it's like, yeah, this is why you're the 7%. Vladimir Putin is not politically correct. He doesn't have to be, and so he's a serious person. And it's not even that he's saying things that are like offensive, like, I can't say the N-word anymore, you know, political correctness has gone too far. He's just speaking the truth. And like we said, political correctness exists to pander to the emotions of women and effeminate men, and those who take issue with political correctness but fail to point this out, they justify its existence. But like Donald Trump once said, we don't have time to be politically correct, folks. We have a country to save. So it's women. I'm sorry that war and politics are scary for you. To be fair, we wanted to keep you separated from them in the first place. Tell me I'm wrong. Get mad. Yeah, line starts back there. Go ahead. Agree with Jen Psaki and Kamala Harris. Go agree with them on women. I'll be over here with Christianity, Islam, Buddhism.
H. Baird says he seems to like one of those people who goes to Colonial Williamsburg to be weird to the black reenactors.
Buddhism, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, the founding fathers, Aristotle, Augustine. Basically everyone until like 50 years ago. It's really funny how they have to brainwash people to get them to agree with their ideas. Like the only way that you could ever make a society so backwards, so quickly, is if you had a way to keep everybody glued to the propaganda at every waking moment, which is exactly what technology has enabled them to do. It creates this artificial herd consensus that we're susceptible to, and which women are especially susceptible to. And we've talked about this extensively in the Christianity and Conservatism video, which you should definitely go watch. But Machiavelli had this idea about two types of rulers, lions and foxes. And I think this is really important to cover if we really want to give this whole thing the proper analysis. But then I thought, well, if we take time explaining that, then it's going to get off topic. But then I realized that I can simply just recycle the footage from the previous explanation that I gave to you guys, and it will register as a cutaway instead of a diversion, since I will be dressed differently and the clip will occupy a different geography of your screen. So that's the plan. This is very important. Please enjoy. So, in the modern context, the lion is the conservative. He values God, tradition, order, his nation, etc. But he hasn't used his strength because he doesn't understand the threat that he's being faced with yet. And he doesn't understand how much power he's lost to the foxes. But in a
Meek says, why mention Nietzsche when you're everything he described wrong with the world?
Important distinction to be made between the two in the modern context is that the lion isn't necessarily not cunning because he doesn't know how to be, but more often because he purposefully elects not to be cunning because he assumes that his enemies are not actually his enemies, and or that they are acting in good faith, or that to be cunning is to sacrifice sacred principles.
The best metaphors, by the way, are ones you have to spend paragraphs and paragraphs explaining. That's how you know it's a good metaphor, when you have to, like, categorize and explain exactly what you mean by the metaphor. It means it's very accurate.
Etc. That's the line. The fox in the modern context is the left-wing individual. They don't value tradition or God or nation. They value progress. They value tolerance and being nice, etc. But they're different from the lion because their use of cunning is not necessarily out of choice, but rather necessity. Because foxes and liberals tend to be weaker, more feminine, more insecure, more mentally ill. It's so true. All those things. They are intimidated by strength in competition because they cannot contend with it. So instead, they use deception. They use manipulation. That's how they achieve their
projection.
They manipulate information. The lions, they're outdated. They're out of touch. We know better now. We don't need those things anymore. That's the only way that you can reduce or handicap the lions. You eliminate all of the things that they would be inclined to defend. You remove from the mainstream conversation any concept of God, of nation, of family, of heritage, of culture, all of it, because the lion cannot act if he feels as though he has nothing to defend. So the foxes gain and maintain their power through cunning and guile. They manipulate narratives, they manipulate the truth, all to convince you through brainwashing that the system is good. It should exist, and our people are the ones who should be running it, whereas the lions would just take power regardless. So the fox teaches you in public education that the dictators of days past, well, they were lions who used force. And they do this to you so that you don't detect the ways in which they have power over you now, because they control your mind, and therefore they control your reality. And if not yours, then those of the masses, which makes no difference since the masses vote based off how the regime defines reality, which...
H. Baird says, fun fact, male lions are moochers, female lions do all the hunting, so him choosing lions as his representation is oddly telling. Tucker White says, Jesus Christ, John.
Get on with it!
Don't worry, guys, we still have 50 minutes left.
Justifies the existence and the actions of the regime, all of which end up affecting your immediate reality, regardless of whether you can think and operate for yourself, because you still live in that society and therefore under that system.
We live in a society.
Now, that being said, given that the Fox's power tends to be implicit, it's less obvious than explicit power, it also tends to be less immediately secure because Foxes themselves tend to be insecure, which means that they're always going to be seeking forms of additional soft power to wield over the population, whether that's regime narratives being introduced into advertising or popular culture, or even something as symbolic as participating in a mass ritual, anything to let them know that you're in compliance and to let you know that, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what's happening. It's in your face. You're not escaping it anytime soon. These are things like demoralization tactics, humiliation rituals, etc., all designed to remind you through soft power.
Things I don't like are humiliation rituals.
Power that you are subject to the ideological tyranny of the regime, which is just as imposing in your day-to-day life, and actually even more so in many cases than the definition of tyranny that they taught you to be afraid of in public school. But the problem with this is that what the narrative says is happening does not often match reality, and so the narrative is always adjusting and having to explain itself. And it's allowed to do that because the masses are stupid and they lack agency. That's why we point and laugh when we see these people.
People who disagree with me have no agency.
Saying things, you know, in January 2020, and then in 2021, the next year, January, they're saying the completely opposite thing. And it's like, yeah, it's funny, but that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is that they literally cannot understand the difference. And we have to understand that. It's not that they're hypocrites, it's that they're lemmings, they're sheep. And you're going to have to figure out how to work within that reality before it's too late, frankly. But yeah, so as the narratives get more and more complex, they naturally start to lose contact with reality and everything becomes so cloudy and confusing. So then they start compensating for that by assuring you that all of this nonsense, which goes against your instincts and better judgment, it's all being promoted by the experts in science.
Can change over a year.
Science,
and our knowledge and understanding of things can change.
But ultimately, what's going to happen is they will lose contact with the reality of what it takes to maintain power, whether that's domestically or on the global scale, because they get too caught up in their own nonsense. And remember, all of the education that you received from the state is a part of that narrative, and it's all self-justifying. Even this idea of,
I knew I shouldn't trust math.
Oh, well, knowledge is power. No, it's not. What does that even mean? That's what you hear in school, but it's not true. Your knowledge of the vocab terms of the regime narratives is not power, but them forcing you to know those vocab terms in order to participate in society, that's power. Oh, well, there's not total media censorship like under real tyranny. It doesn't matter. There doesn't have to be. And they know that. You personally can access information and do your own research because you're smart. You think for yourself, but the masses don't. They aren't capable of doing that. But guess what? Their vote counts just as much as yours does. And it's those votes that justify all of the changes in society that do and will affect you directly. It is literally the equivalent of you going into a classroom as an adult and the teacher says, okay, kids, put up your hands to vote. We can either eat celery sticks or goldfish. But remember, the goldfish are poison. And you're like, this is ridiculous. Goldfish are not poison. They are the snack that smiles back. I can't believe she thinks we would buy into, oh, they're putting their hands up. They're putting their hands up for celery sticks. And guess what you're eating? Celery sticks. There's actually, that's not even...
Celery sticks are actually better for you, John. Did you know that? Interesting metaphor choice.
Like, there's...
Did he say like? Might be a simile.
Much worse.
Stone Corbell says you literally went on a rant about processed food earlier, John.
Stuff going on in classrooms. Like, that's actually...
I'm not going to skip the cutaway. He's going to talk about it and reference it, so I can't skip it.
Actually significantly more believable than what kids are being taught now. But still, the lion loses power to the foxes reduce and handicap the lions, then they use implicit force to maintain their power in society. And this is how a liberal democracy functions, and it's not sustainable, and collapse is inevitable. And you can actually map out this trend pretty clearly following World War II. Remember, we talked about this earlier in the series, and now it's all coming together because you've got the post-World War II intellectual trends that sought to strip man of any sense of identity or understanding of the truth, which might compel him to fight for something. Then you weaken him by destroying masculinity, subsidizing poisonous food, poisoning the water supply, etc., etc. Now you've got all the men who would be lions feeling as though they have nothing to defend and no physical means of doing so, even if they did, and then the foxes rise to power. Slowly, the regime narratives drift further from reality, the regime destabilizes.
This is a lot of words for trying to explain that he thinks everyone who disagrees with him socially or economically, I guess, is evil and non-human and deserves to die.
This total collapse unavoidable. So as the handsome right-wing e-boy explained, we live in a society that is governed by foxes. These are people who don't understand how global power works, and they're quickly using their ability to maintain power on both the international and domestic scales. This is the spiritually feminine regime. They think that they can literally like passive-aggressively make little threats to Putin, that they can run propaganda campaigns to turn the countries against him.
They're literally issuing sanctions against him, incredibly harsh sanctions, and sending aid to Ukraine in the form of weapons and money. That's not passive-aggressive. That's just soft power in domestic, like, affairs. Like, hard power would be going in and, like, actually putting boots on the ground, but we're not doing that because that would, in my opinion, be pretty stupid at this juncture. So instead, you use soft power in order to try and coerce Russia into changing their calculus on how effective this is or worthwhile this is, so hopefully they stop being assholes and killing people.
That they can keep poking at him, suffer no consequences, but then when Putin, who has said for years exactly what he's going to do if they don't stop, when he does that, because they wouldn't stop...
He said he was going to commit war crimes, so it's okay that he's doing it, I guess, John thinks. Weird call. Sorry.
They cannot comprehend it. They have no concept of strength or of following through with a warning. They just don't get it. They literally believe that they can, like, passive-aggressively nag this guy into not executing his will. These people are totally disconnected from reality. They're completely out of touch, and they inherited this power structure from previous generations who constructed it and who were able to do so because, frankly, they were far more competent and in touch with reality. But now it's in the hands of a class of people that are essentially spoiled brats, like we said, with absolutely zero ability to imagine themselves ever losing their place at the top of the world stage. And since obviously insanity shares no overlap with competence, everything starts to decay and to degenerate. And the bad news, which is really good news since it was inevitable anyways, is that as the political order decays internationally, it's going to become much more totalitarian domestically, which we've already seen some signs of. But in the meantime, their general code of operation...
I'm guessing what he thinks is totalitarian is masks. I don't know.
And will basically be to just grasp at straws. And before this new wave of propaganda, before this new NPC firmware update was released, the average American probably wouldn't understand all this anti-Russia sentiment from the ruling class. But that's, of course, because the average American views the world through a different lens. Not through the lens of the international elite, you know, that all governments who are not in compliance must be collapsed, they must be absolutely destroyed, and then we must build back better, which, of course, is defined by a restructuring to better fit their agenda, a great reset, if you will. And this is their overriding ambition. It's like a pathology. And
he's just, again, dog whistling towards conspiracy theorists.
You can personally decide with what level of schizophrenia you'd like to infer their intentions, but this is just uncontroversially true. Like, they're openly saying this. They're saying, oh, well, Putin violated the international order. What does that even mean in practice? Basically, not being aligned with the values of the globalist American empire. And we all know what those are.
Dog whistle.
Because they fly internationally right next to the American flag. But anyways, everybody knows that they have control over Biden, over the transnational corporations, over many European governments.
Dog whistle.
Many other global governments. And they can more or less...
Randy Owl says, yeah, Americans never had reasons to hate Putin. Pay no attention to the sign in the back.
Get these apparatuses to comply with their will. They don't have this with Russia, though. And you can do your own research into what they call the oligarchs of Russian society and how Putin actually reeled them in the early 2000s, as opposed to in this country where our oligarchs are in such firm control that no one even uses the word oligarch to refer to them publicly. And sometimes people say that he's...
I do. What's up?
What do you?
Nothing. What's up?
What do you?
Call rich people oligarchs?
Ah. I just wanted a hug. Hello.
He's actually in bed with the WEF, but even then, it's like his interactions with them
They're asking me to save them. What am I saving them from? John. Doyle.
Yeah. We only have 45 minutes left, guys. Don't worry.
Ugh. I love you.
Love you too.
Basically him like threatening them. So I don't know. Actions speak louder than words, and their actions suggest that they view Russia as something beyond their control. Therefore, their instinct is to collapse it, and they have to act quickly because the world order is shifting, the international order is shifting, and it's because of the incompetence that they've displayed. And ironically, they've actually shot themselves in the foot a little bit here, because if they try this in about 10 more years, it's not going to land as effectively because of all the new Americans they've imported. They just wouldn't care. And even now, people don't really share.
That's not even a dog whistle. That's just outright anti-immigrant sentiment. Tucker White says, I much prefer the old school robber barons. And Sky Come Up Fallen says, why does John want fascism? That I don't understand. Is it that he doesn't see that people are miserable under dictators, or is he delusional enough to believe he would be part of the ruling class? The latter. It's the latter.
Sharing this elite and
Speedy Yoshi says, damn, that's an awesome outfit, Baha.
Oh, thank you.
an ethnic grudge against Russia that's shared by our national security archipelago. But if you don't think they'd risk a world war for this, then you're not reading the room. I mean, all of their bluffs have been called. The dollar could literally collapse. Its value is determined by its global circulation and by America's perceived military effectiveness. You've got huge global economies in the last few weeks talking about moving away from the dollar. We've embarrassed ourselves in Afghanistan. We're embarrassing ourselves now. And it's rapidly reaching a point where nobody in the world, not just Americans, but nobody in the world has any faith in any of the American institutions. And we'll talk more about what that's going to look like, why it's...
That's so weird and antithetical to everything that is actually going on. The ruble has dropped like fucking crazy since the Russian invasion, and NATO and general, like, Western forces, if you want to call it that, are closer than they ever have been in, like, the last decade due to Russia's dumb fuckery. Like, what are you talking about, John?
It's actually a good thing, but just keep that in mind for
$1 equals 85 rubles. Nice.
now. That it is a good thing in the long run for American patriots, but also remember what they were willing to do to get Trump out of office. I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but...
Oh, more conspiracy theory shit. H. Baird says, John likes fascism because he lacks the ability to update his internal model of the world. With fascism, he believes that anything that contradicts that internal model will be suppressed and the cognitive dissonance will go away. I gotta pee again. Sorry, I know I'm peeing a lot. And put something on while I pee. That's not what I wanted.
I was up all night thinking about this. Can you shoot mashed potatoes out of a super soaker? Spooning it out on a plate just doesn't give you the distance. Oh, yeah. We need a funnel. All right, let's see if this works. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's some fine mashed potatoes. Listen, buddy, I'm not looking for any trouble. Look at you. You're a mess. Boy, I sure am hungry. Plates down here, Mrs. Sausage. Bop, 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 bop.
They lit the country on fire and destroyed its economy just to do that. Anything that they don't control is repulsive to them. It's uncultured, it's less refined and unsophisticated. They need to go spread freedom and democracy, which of course just means like establish a ruling oligarchy in the country that's loyal to them, like they've done so many times and like they did in Ukraine. So when the Ukrainian government tells you that they're fighting on behalf of the New World Order, believe them, because that's what it's all about. And if America had any legitimate interest in this conflict, meaning any interest that served to benefit the American people, then the incessant propaganda would not be necessary. Like easily 95% of everything that you've seen or heard is a lie. The horror stories, the images, the hero stories, all of it. Like I can't talk about it too much here, but I've been keeping up with it all. And if you do a few hours of honest research away from the mainstream sources, you will be shocked by what you find.
If you look at Russian and right-wing Russian-affiliated propaganda sources, you'll find out that the mainstream narrative is total bullshit. Look, I'm not saying that there hasn't been any misinformation coming from the Ukrainian or American sides in this conflict, but what John is effectively telling you to do is just go and listen to, like, RT or other right-wing news sources. And I don't even mean, like, Fox News. I mean, like, the ones that shill QAnon conspiracy theories. Tucker White says, John, you're not going to be a part of the ruling class when the day of the rope comes. You're going to be the twink in the French maid outfit serving champagne and adrenochrome at the DC cocaine orgies.
A good rule of thumb, actually, is that it's more likely than not that the opposite of everything that they're telling you is actually the case. So do with that what you will, but this gets back to what America is, why we exist. And as we said, we don't even know what we're doing anymore, like what we're about, which is why so many people are like, yeah, you know, I guess we can be the global mercenary force for debt, slavery, and pride parades. But of course, we shouldn't have the burden of proof, right? If we are to be dragged into a foreign conflict, foreign in every sense of the term, it's far away from us, we have nothing to do with it, we don't even understand it, etc. If we are to be dragged into that, then they have to make an argument for that. We don't have to make an argument against getting involved in that. That should be the default, right? So if you're going to take money and lives away from American households, then it is your responsibility to highlight what interest we have in that conflict. That's
no lives have been taken away from American households, John. We're not currently, nor is there a plan to get us involved on the ground in Ukraine. That would be bad. That would, I agree, basically be the start of World War III, which would not be a good thing. Kale Croy 88 thanks for 8 months, says the 2/5 Mark Ruffalo's of the potato gun was fair. Love your Arcana, a wonderful way to end my day for hopefully many, many more days to come. Yours would have sounded better. Damn. Thanks.
That's what a rational government would do. But we don't, of course, have a rational government. Moreover, we don't have a rational people, and so they don't even have to do that because they can just run the emotional propaganda campaigns and achieve the same effect, like we've been saying. But the bottom line is this. If we believe what they've been telling us for decades, that our purpose is to serve the world, that we are not unique and good and exceptional in our own right, that it's only that we allow the world to come here, that's what makes us good. It's only that we act as charity and this sort of like mercenary apparatus for the rest of the world, that's what makes us good. Then maybe we deserve what we get. But that's not true. And if you actually believe that America's purpose is to serve the purposes of other countries, then you've lost the plot. And you're a
I've literally never heard anyone make that argument.
Globalist, and I don't care for you. So even though America is a clearly defined nation with a clear history and border and culture, and most importantly, the ability to defend all of that, even if it suicidally doesn't choose to, we don't get to be a real country. We're just an idea. We're an experiment. But Ukraine, which literally, as we just covered, only exists because it's propped up by the State Department to basically harass Russia, that's a real country. They have a right to exist. So we're going to send them $14 billion to try to secure their borders.
He's literally comparing his culture war, right-wing, I don't like gay people bullshit to a foreign entity invading a sovereign nation. Those aren't equivalent.
When we won't even secure ours. It's such a headache, isn't it? Why would they be doing this? Why are they acting like this? It's because they have an interest in Ukraine. You don't, your family doesn't, but they do. That's the key difference. We have no legal or moral obligation to get involved in Ukraine, but that's not what it's about. And, you know, it's one thing to pull the whole, oh, we shouldn't focus on other countries as long as we have homeless people here and crumbling infrastructure here, which is true. But with this case in particular, it's worth emphasizing that literally what is being disputed thousands of miles away is sovereignty and borders, which is exactly what's in dispute right now in this country. And
again, if Mexico tried to literally invade the United States like the government of Mexico tried to invade the United States, or heck, Canada, it's always who you least expect, then I would agree we should defend ourselves. But that's not what you're talking about, John. Stop pretending like that's what you're talking about. You're comparing individual people coming into the country to work to a literal armed invasion. The two things aren't even in the same book, much less on the same page. They're not the same thing. Complete non sequitur. Tucker White says, I wonder what John Doyle would say about Israel, a borderline ethno-state that's entirely propped up by the United States. I'd imagine he's not a fan of Israel, considering I'm guessing he's an anti-Semite. Overthought says, please, Canada, annex Michigan into Ontario. I'm on board.
Our country, except the dispute is between the attitudes of the public, who desperately want a secure southern border, and the attitudes of the people who pull the strings, who want completely open borders and the resultant continued mass migration from the third world to the point where even they're asking our border patrol, if they want to go help with Ukraine's borders. But of course, this was always the goal. The post-war neoliberal consensus, which we've covered extensively on this channel, congratulations, nerds. Like, you held the world in relative stability for a few decades. Was it worth the blood and wealth of American families? These people watched their sons go and fight and die for the same expert class, the same experts. We're very serious people. We read studies. Have you seen this table? Very serious people. and then they ship their jobs to countries that hate us, and then those families were told that they're uneducated, they're called uncultured, they're racist hicks for wanting it to stop. So even if the average American gave a damn about playing world police, which they don't, the Biden administration has effectively purged the military of most of the people who would be the most inclined to actually give a damn about this country, and they did that so that they could turn their focus on wielding that power over those same people domestically.
I guess they should have been vaccinated then. Weird. Also, not that many people got kicked out of the military for being unvaccinated.
As the political order decays internationally. Because there's absolutely no will to fight anymore. And the whole world can see that. We look like an absolute circus, complete with the freak show. Because you people, you thought that mean tweets or lack thereof were actually the defining variable of a nation's perceived legitimacy. You chose this.
Ah, yes, famously, the only complaint about Donald Trump was his mean tweets and literally nothing else.
And yeah, I'm thinking we're bringing back Doom Paul, because he couldn't just let it be. The whole idea behind neoconservatism and neoliberalism, that America's post-war imperative was to establish the new world order, to spread freedom to the rest of the world by force if necessary. Footnote, it was always necessary, and in cases like Afghanistan, it was so necessary that the second that force goes away, they just go right back to normal, because for them, that's their culture. That is normal, and no amount of think tank strategic pamphlets is ever going to change that. But the sleight of hand was that neoconservatism said it was for freedom. And neoliberalism basically clarified by adding "to be gay" onto that. But there's no effective difference. Which is why it didn't matter who was in office and what party they supposedly had membership in. Bush had us in the forever wars, Clinton had us in the forever wars, Bush again, then Obama, and we didn't actually begin to get out of them until President Trump, an outsider, said, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And then you look at what happens when the adults are back in charge, when there's no more mean tweets, within a year of a return to normal, a return to decency, a return to...
Are you blaming Biden for Russia invading Ukraine? Why? Sky Comet Fallen says, John, it's unconstitutional to use the military against you. Chill out.
Who we are, this happens. The global economy could very well collapse because your retarded middle-aged aunt got offended when a billionaire celebrity stated the fact that women will let high-status men touch them, probably because she was just jealous that a man like that would never want to do that to her, frankly. And we are...
Wow, even for John, that's bad.
Are being so frank today, because that's just the reality of it. The globalist American empire wants to control, or rather have significant influence throughout the whole world. And the biggest impediment to that goal is the existence of strong nationalist countries like Russia and like China, which could be why you've been conditioned, even after the Cold War, to think that these countries are evil, that they're our enemies. Oh, well, but John, they're so terrible. They silence dissent. Hey, so do we. Let he whose government hasn't killed a journalist change their profile picture first. Check your emotional bandwidth, big guy, because there is absolutely no reason to care about how mean Russia is when our own government treats us worse than Russia's ever could or ever would.
Jesus Christ, John.
No Russian ever called me incel. No Russian ever called me domestic terrorist. No Russian ever called me a racist for no other reason than me being white. No Russian ever tried to force my family and my friends to choose between having a livelihood or taking weird chemicals. No Russian ever tried to get my younger family members to chop things off or to dye their hair and produce pornography of themselves. No Russian ever so obviously did something in plain view and then...
Should we just start like a John Doyle days until his channel gets banned? Because, like, he's just not even hiding anything anymore.
Called me crazy for just questioning whether they did it and then bragged...
Reminder that John is not emotional, though. He is a very logical man who has no emotions. He's not angry here, and even if he was, anger isn't an emotion. Remember.
About it later.
Only caring about people is an emotion. Being mad and jilted is rational.
By manipulating language and saying they just fortified it. No Russian ever blasphemed God to me. No Russian ever tried to get my generation to hate itself and its heritage. No Russian ever tried to...
Sky Comet Fallen says, is John an I-word? He's using the I-word arguments about hypergamy. I have no idea.
Flood my country with immigrants from the third world while the American dream is already destroyed for...
Again, if you want this video for whatever reason, here's a link.
Its own people. No Russian ever pumped my country with drugs and then sat back and profited while the heart of the country killed itself. No Russian ever voted to allow American companies to ship jobs to Mexico, India, China. No Russian ever devalued my currency so badly that the American worker just took like a 30% pay cut in the last year, probably worse actually. No Russian ever threatened to kill me for saying a man in a dress is still a man. No Russia ever declared me a domestic terrorist for wanting my country to be as great as it used to be. You know, the compass always points north. The problem is always our own ruling class, and the same people who did all of this to you are now unanimously maneuvering to try to get you to go to war against Russia. It's incredible. Like, I see all the propaganda, and it recalls the old Trump tweet, like, is this even possible to believe? No thanks. You guys are dumb. I'm a genius, okay? Even if I'm 0-0, you guys are like 0-700. So yeah, I'm gonna keep it real with you, NATO. I'm not dying for pride parades in Kiev. Hey, bro, on gang, I'm not dying for the cumulative net worth of the ruling class. Ain't no cap in my rap. Do you feel me? I'm not dying in a war over democracy. I mean, unless it's on the other side. Which, I mean, obviously, I mean, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. The other side of the Atlantic Ocean, obviously, we don't want the fighting happening over here. We want to keep it over in Europe. We don't want any George Floyd statues, any child gender clinics getting shelled here. Hey, bro, if I'm lying, I'm flying, and I ain't got wings for real. But it really is a waste of time to try to explain this to people. You know, anyone who, at their own accord, hasn't done like 15 minutes of independent research into Russian history, not even back to like 987 or even 1991, not even 1991, like winding the clocks back 8 years would more or less suffice. But anyone who hasn't had the inclination to do that probably isn't going to care about the explanation that this deserves. And considering that this is potentially World War III, I'd say it does deserve an explanation that's more sophisticated than, again, the Saturday morning cartoon. That's
Hernandia Owl says, no wonder this video is 2 hours long. He just keeps repeating the same points over and over. Yeah.
That's why when I was posting on my Instagram about this, I had a bunch of 15-year-olds who just got into politics like a year ago accusing me of, quote, simping for Vladimir Putin. They'll read what I said, which I'll reiterate to you now. And the conclusion which they drew was that I am simping for Vladimir Putin. And I have to pull rank on this and remind you that my treatise on simping got over 300,000 views. I am the authority on this. And actually, if you want to talk about simping, which literally means you're investing energy into something mediocre that doesn't even like you, siding with the same government which destroyed the country over whom it rules out of contempt for the people over whom it rules, who they perceive to basically be cattle from whom to harvest, yeah, I'm thinking...
John, you said you think 95% of people in the United States aren't even people. Stay consistent for 5 seconds, please.
You're the simp. Actually, hey, fact check, you're the simp. I'm just trying to make America great again. But if we can be mature about this, the question in essence is simply who is the greater and more immediate enemy? Who do we deal with as American patriots? Who's trying to get us sooner and who's trying to do worse things to us? That's,
I would say, you.
The question, and it's an important one. So I'll read to you now what I posted on my Instagram about this question, and I'll try to put something interesting on screen as well, just in case you get bored. So I said, what Putin is doing is the most significant thing to happen in global politics since Trump was elected in 2016. I'll probably end up discussing this in the next video, even if nominally unrelated, simply because I'm so excited about it, which of course didn't end up happening because it's getting its own video now. But in the meantime, just enjoy all of the worst people in the world seething about it. If you disagree, don't DM me about it. It would be better to just write a letter to the CIA in which you congratulate them on the effectiveness of their propaganda. To briefly elaborate, it is unequivocally a positive thing.
If you follow John's Instagram, by the way, it's fucking wild.
For the American people when the hostile regime, which does little else but abuse them, loses legitimacy and embarrasses itself on the global stage. Moreover, throughout history, revolutions, so to speak, have always been made possible by the support of domestic or foreign institutions and sympathetic governments. It's fair to say that Putin has been demonstrably sympathetic at best, not trying to psyop the world into killing itself at worst to American patriots.
He really loves dictators, huh?
The same cannot be said about the occupying regime, which literally wants to brainwash and rape your kids, and they think it's funny.
Again, with the baseless accusations of pedophilia.
I'm not necessarily pro-Putin unfailingly, but I do get excited when good things happen. And the greatest impediment to the globalist American empire and the global libtard menace is the existence of strong nationalist countries such as Russia. This is why they're melting down currently. NATO has always been about breaking up Russia. They fear what that country represents: nationalism, Christianity, and general normality when compared to our completely backwards country. The icing on the cake would be if China, easily recognizing the incompetence of the U.S. military in addition to absolutely no public faith in the institutions, took Taiwan. Kidding. I do not want collapse. I enjoy the system and all of its legitimacy and sexual perversion and multiculturalism. It is my favorite. Everyone who voted for Joe Biden is retarded. Literally, this is a fact and there are no exceptions. Like Cernovich said, you are not serious people and you can't be treated with anything beyond this like paternal love and sympathy for your condition as we begin to make it impossible for you to ever do this to our country again. And I have to click
again, just literally telling people he's gonna make it so they can't vote. Let's see. We'll do this one. Tucker White says, this annoying plotting rightoid makes this Stefan Molyneux charismatic. I gotta play it. Is it Stefan Molyneux? No. Okay.
Shut up, shut up, shut up! Jesus Christ, man, what the hell is wrong with you? Please, just shut up!
It's okay, guys. We're getting there. 30 minutes left.
Clarifies this to those stuck in this boomer tier Cold War nostalgia. We are the evil empire. Where U.S. military power exists globally, it promotes and enforces sodomy, the genocide of the unborn, and the destruction of the family structure. Russia suffers from these problems domestically, even more so than we do in some instances, but this is in spite of them, not intentionally and directly because of them. My allegiance is not to a literally gay and demonic empire, which is currently beginning the more advanced stages of its implosion, epic, but only to God. I love my country because of its people and history. Its government is trying to actively destroy those things. Therefore, I smile when that government loses legitimacy in the eyes.
John literally will be in favor of a totalitarian dictatorship if it means he doesn't have to understand that LGBT people can exist openly in his country. Genius.
Of its own people in the world. I really don't know how else to put it. And our country's present form,
I know, right?
if it were
Deep
free to
fried
have power
memes.
over the
It must be
globe, it would
2017
look something
already.
like obese female teachers instructing Arab and Chinese kindergartners about anal sex and Moloch. This is literally a fact. The same dudes who swear they never trust the government, media, or educational institutions are in my DMs shilling State Department talking points. Now, this is, of course, all inarguably correct. But it's...
Anti-Pretzel says, this guy must really love the sound of his own grating. I'm smarter than you because I'm correct and you aren't. Also, John, you're telling us you want a Russian boot crushing your throat without outright stating it.
Simply cannot be overstated. When we say God, family, country, that's not meant to be a bumper sticker. That is a hierarchy. We have allowed for this country to become an abomination. And the only reason it hasn't been burned until there is no combustible matter left to fuel the flames is because there are still righteous people here. And so our job is to try as hard as we can to do right by God and to do right by those people and to be one of those people, and the rest is in his hands. And all I need to know, and I do know this, and if you don't, then you're room illiterate, all I need to know is that the globalist cabal is the greatest force for evil currently in the world that exists.
Again, just QAnon pandering.
Therefore, anything that exists as an impediment to them, even if not explicitly righteous in itself, is good for American patriots. And that's all we have to focus on. And we absolutely cannot allow ourselves to get lost in the weeds and forget that. The establishment is the enemy. The establishment is the enemy. Write that on the blackboard 100 times and never forget it. And people will respond to this with State Department talking points as though they're self-justifying. Like, well, John, don't you get it now? China's going to take Taiwan. Okay, that doesn't matter either. No, explain to me why that matters in your own words. I'm curious.
If you're being selfish and don't even care about, like, the lives of people or whatever, Taiwan, I'm pretty sure, is the #1 producer of, like, certain computer components. And if China got control of it, that would be economically bad for America, probably, which you seem to kind of care about for some reason. I'm not really sure what your opinion on economics is at this point. Like, you hate capitalism, but also you like capitalism, but really it seems like you use it as an anti-Semitic dog whistle, so I don't really know what your feelings are.
Curious. Taiwan, yet another client state of the globalist American empire. But even if you're educated enough on the matter to talk about the chips, that still implicates the regime as the ultimate culprit, since they've purposefully destroyed our manufacturing and our independence, does it not? So ultimately, the same way that a compass, when functioning properly, will always point north, any proper analysis of these problems will always point to our own regime as the root of the problem. And who do you think invented that technology in the first place? It's made in Taiwan, but who got that ball rolling? Who invented that technology? Who taught them about that? Made in America used to be a badge of dignity and competence. Now it's barely a badge anymore. Plus, it's like, if you want to deal with a chip shortage, and like, stop making everything smarts to justify it costing more, and also to explain why it's manufactured poorly. Oh, well, these new ones are just, they're just so complex. Your refrigerators and dishwashers don't need chips, bud, okay? Just write better software, too. Like, computers and phones from the...
Back in my day, John, you're like 22 years old. What the fuck are you doing?
Mid-2000s. 2010s, they still work fine without.
Like, he understands that, like, ovens and stuff still used chips before, like, smart stuff came on the market, right? Like, there's still components that are used in, like, modern electronics even prior to, like, smart bullshit.
Without all this unnecessary, like, fat. But again, it's a red herring. And additionally, things are going to get bad regardless, which we'll finish with. But if our biggest concern is things getting bad because of chip shortages, that's probably going to be like a blessing, right? And none of this means that you have to be pro-China or pro-Russia. I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm simply saying that there is a reason why all of the worst people in the world have chosen the side that they have. And there is a reason that they have mobilized the entire propaganda machine to fire on all cylinders to try to get you to do the same. And you should consider why that may be. And hopefully this has given you some food for thought, because the bottom line is, like, if you are pro-Ukraine, then you are pro-globalist American empire, and you are pro-global libtard menace. Like, they smile at that, so ask yourself why. It's okay to just be neutral, since the interests of the American people have absolutely nothing to do with Ukraine, but it is not okay to side with these people, because despite your best intentions, you're ultimately just shooting yourself in the foot. Like, why would you ever believe what these people are telling you? Remember when they told you that Biden was going to be the moderate candidate? Oh, he was going to unify the...
He is a moderate candidate. He's very, very fucking centrist. KBS says, Taiwan Semiconductor Company, TSMC, is the biggest manufacturer of CPUs in the world and a major maker of semiconductors, period. All the major chip foundries are in Taiwan. An invasion would certainly disrupt those foundries. Any disruption of those foundries would be a months to years-long shutdown that would equate the end of the world economy. And Overthought says he'd probably give the Unabomber's manifesto 5 stars.
The country. And now they're telling you, they're saying, maybe the enemies are China and Russia and not your neighbor who thinks slightly differently than you. No, it's 100% the libtard. The libtard would vote, and they love voting, to send me to a camp if they could. And they would call it accountability. I mean,
No, I wouldn't. I just want you to stop wanting me dead. That would be cool.
They supported this less than a year ago. All of this anti-Russia bloodlust, all these violent fantasies about punching Nazis, they're casting you into those fantasies. We'll talk about that more in a second, but no, my instincts have evolved over many generations of very intelligent, also handsome, honorable, generally talented people, frankly. I'm not going to betray those instincts that they have given to me, those instincts which tell me that the threat is the libtard and not these other folks. And I'm especially not going to betray those instincts for people who are bizarre and annoying like these people are. But such is the...
Look, people with different colored hair! The horror.
American experience. Nationalism is good, but only when it's for other countries. Civilians having guns is epic and cool everywhere except for literally one of, I believe, 3 countries where it's enshrined in their constitution as a God-given right. These are the same people who always said the Second Amendment is stupid because the government has tanks, and now they're like,
John, own a gun, that's fine. I don't care. I'm not anti-gun inherently.
Hey, you can fight a tank with a magless AK and a paint balloon, duh! Like, they're trying to activate people by tapping into what they've tried so hard to destroy, which kind of concedes that they can't be destroyed because they're just natural and inevitable. And these are things like masculinity, things like nationalism, patriotism, etc. But of course, they can only be used when in service of the global libtard menace, which is why you've got these guys who have been double masking in their cars, they're afraid of toddlers, they're refusing to go back to the office, and now they're like posting photographs of Zelensky.
John, you know that a lot of people don't want to go back to the office just because they hate offices, right? And they think it's a waste of time and money. It's not just because of COVID.
From like 4 years ago in a combat helmet, like, this is what a real man does. This, so much this, real men fight for anal sex. Someone in Lieutenant Diane's family had fought and died for anal sex in every single American war. I guess you could say had a lot to live up to. Like, all of a sudden, defending the homeland is honorable. They're literally inventing hero stories for wartime propaganda, and they all turn out to be complete lies. And then people are like, well, if it inspires people, then it doesn't have to be true. Doesn't that sound a bit strange? Like, you'd think if something really bad were happening, the truth in itself would be inspiring. Like, you wouldn't have to lie about it, right? The most effective propaganda is effective because it condenses what the people know is true into something easily spread. Make America great again. But because these people lie, they have to coat the world with so much propaganda that it just ceases to be inspirational by necessity, but rather just the entire foundation for what people believe. But yeah, even the appeals to how this affects the day-to-day when they do them, which is very rare, but when properly analyzed, they just fall flat. Well, the economy is going to collapse because of this. Again, that's literally because of our ruling class. We control-Z'd energy independence because people convinced themselves that the world was going to end if we didn't stop cows from farting. And Europe especially let themselves become totally dependent on Russia for oil and gas. Germany even closed nuclear power plants. So like we literally handed the leverage to Vladimir Putin on a silver platter. And Trump was right to criticize this. And it's really not enough to say, oh, well, this never would have happened under Trump. Biden's an idiot, because we really have to understand the difference between the two. The key difference within this context, which is just how they view power. It's the lion and the fox. And the reason this wouldn't have happened under Trump isn't just because like Putin's afraid of him necessarily, but it's because they're both lions. And Trump would have just said straight up like, hey, Ukraine's not getting into NATO, by the way. And then this crisis like would not exist. But
no. I mean, Trump might have said that. I'm not saying he wouldn't. But then Putin also would have invaded and taken over. And I find it really interesting too, because if John's argument is, oh boy, they would have put missiles in Ukraine, and then they would have had missiles on the border of Russia, so we can't have that, so they gotta invade. So now Russia's trying to invade Ukraine and presumably annex it and turn it into part of Russia, at which point it'll now be on the border of a place where America could theoretically have NATO-allied missiles. So all they've done is put themselves in the same situation, but with more land.
It does, and we're in some hot water because our reigning ideology is global libtardism, which mandates that we must sacrifice up to anything, including our lives, for its cancerous propagation. And this, of course, is what destroyed our energy independence. It's what compelled us to outsource our industrial base to China. And now, because we still live in a world where production is power and we don't produce anything, we just have weird debt and usury and services and middle managers for the majority of our economy, we're in trouble. So what do? Do we take the L? Do we yield to Russia? Nope. Sanctions. Get flanked, Putin. Gotcha. Bet you didn't see that coming. Hey, former KGB operative who managed to take power during the collapse of an empire. Bet you didn't expect us to put sanctions on you. Do you think anybody in Russia cares about sanctions?
Yeah, probably.
It's only going to hurt us. Our country's decadent. Russia is strong. They're used to this. They literally will not care. Like, seriously, the United States thinks that they can weaken Russia and draw this conflict out to where Russia becomes unstable enough for regime change, which they're literally calling for openly because of all the reasons that we've been talking about. But the opposite has happened. The people of Russia are actually unifying because of this, and it's because Putin can easily make the argument that Russia is facing an existential threat from the West, which
he uses as propaganda outlets in order to push, which John is against what he considers propaganda in the West. But when Russia literally has state media, and the only media allowed is Russian state media, and anyone who dissents is murdered, they get suicided with 2 shots to the back of the head, that's fine and good, because Putin is anti-LGBT and anti-democracy, which John loves.
Covered is actually true. And what's the argument from our government? Our argument is basically that it's really sad that buildings in a country we can't locate on a map are getting blown up, and so we should pay $9 a gallon.
Do I need to locate buildings on a map to know I don't want innocent people murdered?
For gas, or ride our bikes to work for the sake of democracy. That's literally the position of our governments, and it's out of touch white liberals. It's not compelling me, Jen. I'm gonna be honest. You know, I wouldn't even give up Pop-Tarts for democracy. I haven't had a Pop-Tart in 5 years. Yeah. And I wouldn't even give up the knowledge, like the feeling that if I were so inclined, I could go to the grocery store and get a box of Pop-Tarts for democracy. Even that is more valuable to me than democracy. And that's actually somewhat accurate because the food shortages we're going to have, so Pop-Tarts are not food, but...
I literally went to the store yesterday. The shelves are full. What the fuck are you talking about, John?
I get it. Like, do you think Russia's worried about sanctions? That's the point. Russia...
How much food does John think we get from Russia?
Can handle off...
And if he's talking about fuel in specific, we can still get food. It would just be more expensive, which has already happened with inflation.
Austerity.
Overthought says, have a Pop-Tart and come, John. It'll be all right.
definitely can't. This society would...
I got some Pop-Tarts recently that are like Eggo waffle Pop-Tarts. They're pretty good.
Collapse without an update to the iPhone in the Marvel Cinematic Universe every 8 months. But yeah, we're all, gonna hop on board for paying $10 a gallon for gasoline because we have to defend democracy?
$10 a gallon? John, the United States still has cheaper gasoline than, like, all of Europe. We're fine.
In Ukraine. Hey, if you love the values of this country, then you'll jump into a complicated war in which we have no interest. That's why there's no strategic argument, just rhetoric from a Saturday morning cartoon, because we're ruled by children. Like they tell us that our borders are abstract and oppressive. Oh, but Ukrainian borders, those are sacred. Jen Psaki tells us that standing up for our values is not without cost. I hate girl bosses. Sorry, sweetie, the cost of everything's going to increase because of who we are. They're saying in order to defend the international liberal order. International liberal order. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like a euphemism for what we refer to around these parts as the global libtard menace. And they say that it's brought 75 years of peace and prosperity. Where? Where's the peace and I broke my binoculars. Where's the peace and prosperity? That just means low testosterone and decadence. What literally, like, that's what that means. When they say peace and prosperity,
there are two people who use the term decadence: tankies and Nazis. Don't be either of those people.
I mean, destroying everything worth caring about so that no one cares enough about anything to stand up for it. And also everyone's hooked on screens for 16 hours a day watching propaganda, advertisements, propaganda that are advertisements and advertisements that are more or less propaganda. But hey, you do you. You want to go fight for Ukraine? Go ahead. Everybody that's advocating for this should be shipping over to Ukraine right now. Put your own life on the line or shut up about what should be done with ours. You know? But they...
Crash Mio says, complain to the oil companies that allegedly price fix just like the diamond companies. It's plain and simple price gouging.
Won't do that, because remember, it's about the interests of the ruling class, of the global libtard menace, and of the globalist American empire. It's not about you. Oh, you can't buy eggs and you're not making enough money for it to be worth it for you to drive to work? Inflation is the price we have to pay to battle Putin. Who's we? Who is we? Why don't you do it? Or rather, like, why don't you don't do it? Like, just stop. They're literally going to collapse the empire because they think Putin is mean. The history books will literally write that an orange man with a golden mane bullied the elite class to such an extent that they decided to collapse their own empire out of spite.
Why would John even be upset about that if he thinks that's what's going to happen? He doesn't like America anyway. Shouldn't he be happy about that? And he can live in Texas in some weird Texas dictatorship or whatever.
Talk about 4D chess. The precious metal baby boomers actually might achieve vindication. It could very easily be wraps for the dollar. And then things really get interesting, right? Because the value of the dollar, like we said, is dependent upon its circulation and the global perception that the United States military is capable of competent action. Our government has currently decided to throw both of those out the window to basically like wave its finger in Putin's face. And the world is responding by adjusting itself to prepare for a world where America is no longer the dominant power. They're going to...
H. Baird says, people are wasting 16 hours on screens absorbing propaganda, says the person putting out a 2-hour Putin apologia.
Start trading in other currencies. They're not siding with us. Huge economies. Top 5 economies are doing this. So yeah, it's going to get bad for us. And we always talk about, you know, the hard times without really understanding the reality of what that entails. Like, this country, I don't think ever has experienced that, to be honest, but we're probably going to, and it's going to really suck for a lot of people. But this is a necessary step, which kind of sounds like the right-wing version of what our government is saying, but they're the ones doing this in the first place.
Tucker White says, there's still 20 minutes of this?
This is the song that doesn't end.
I guess we're just trying to make the best of it. You know, we always say it's going to have to get worse before it gets better. But we think that just means like seeing men kissing on television and maybe having your catalytic converter stolen from your car when it's parked in your driveway. But no, the same way that your body purges itself when deathly ill, this country is going to have to endure serious hardship to breed the type of people strong and capable enough to make it great again, or to build something greater from the ashes, like the phoenix. And it's precisely this level of comfort and decadence that has enabled so many people, particularly affluent white women, to just blindly support World War III. Like, they literally cannot understand that their cozy gated suburb, their HOA meetings, their prescription medication, their wine collection, that is not reality. That is not real. That is something that we like created. That's not the default setting. The default setting of life on this planet is war. It is violence. It is death. Your comfortable life where you don't have to worry about that, which is why you can have a worldview that says, well, if everyone could just get along, that's not the way the world works. And in fact, you only have that lifestyle that
That's not the way the world works, and people like I, John Doyle, will ensure that by being fucking ethno-nationalists siding with an instigator in an international conflict.
enables you to think like that in blissful ignorance because men died for you to be able to do that. So don't disgrace their sacrifice by being ungrateful. Don't take this for granted. Don't be blinded by hubris. You think your graduate degree entitles you to this? Because you're living a life that's an anomaly, and at any moment that could disappear. And in fact, it is such an anomaly that it wouldn't even be missed by history. It wouldn't even be considered something significant enough to write about, like to even document, because of how much of an anomaly it is.
You don't think that if America collapsed today but human civilization went on in some way, that the United States wouldn't be of any note in history, even though we invented computers? And was the television in the United States? Was Farnsworth American? We invented the internet. We're the first people to go to the moon. You don't think America would be in the history books at all? That's a really stupid thing to say.
They'd just be making fun of you for
He was English.
being a fat little piglet. That's what you are. A fat little piglet who's fed itself on so much slop that when the wolves break through the fence, you can't even try to run away. It can't even be mocked thoroughly enough that these people literally thought that they could remove the most natural components of existence: God, family, and country. Literally. No wonder that's a conservative motto. And of course, that's because liberalism fundamentally rejects reality, as we've covered thoroughly on this channel. And they literally tried to socially engineer people into rejecting these outdated, archaic convictions after World War II because they were smart enough, so they thought, to figure out how to keep people from going to war. And now look at where we are. Look at where we are. The entire Western world is weak because for the last 70 years, it's been...
Oh no, people enjoying a bad Star Wars trailer. The horror.
And fed nothing but weakness, and that really caused us to shoot ourselves in the foot, didn't it? Because now you look at the percentage of people in the West who will actually fight for their respective countries versus those who will do so in non-Western countries, and we're totally screwed. And like, you look at the foxes we have in power now in the spiritually feminine regime, they think this is all okay because we can, like, what, sing Imagine by John Lennon? We can all just unite against mean people because we're so loving.
Wagroad says Philo Farnsworth was born in SLC, Utah. And Tucker White says, alright, I'm throwing in the towel. I can't take any more of this insipid garbage. Also, F you for making us watch this, you evil lizard person. I don't know if you know this. Watching this stream is voluntary. I didn't make you click on it. Fun fact.
Vladimir Putin can say, yeah, they're going to put missiles in Ukraine which can reach Moscow. And we just say, well, yeah, because you guys are mean and we're so loving. Now we've got the most insecure, miserable, unstable people advocating for a no-fly zone in Ukraine. They're trying to garner support for war against Putin because he's mean. And of course, this could all literally be avoided.
Being a dictator equals being mean.
If they had just said that Ukraine was never going to be in NATO, went back to neutrality, but these people want blood more than anything. So that's not what's being discussed. Like, we send missiles
15 minutes left
to his border. He tells us exactly what his problems are. We completely ignore his security interests. We refuse to engage in diplomacy. Oh, why did he do this? What does he want? Men are so confusing. Fact, blue checks literally cannot get it. They are not serious people. Fact, Ukraine's government was overthrown by the global libtard menace for a pro-Western puppet government, and Russia will annex the areas with Russian-speaking populations who want to be a part of Russia, especially because the fake government in Ukraine uses militias.
You can tell they want to be a part of it because they're shooting back at the Russians.
To terrorize them, and they have been for almost a decade. Fact, NATO sending missiles is not self-determination. If you believe this, you should be institutionalized. And that's how you know it's all based on incompetent, feminine, prideful impulse. Their biggest asset in this whole thing was their propaganda companies, which they've used for soft coups before, like in 2014 in Ukraine. But they all pulled out of Russia. Netflix, Disney, Pornhub, all these companies are leaving Russia, which is crippling the biggest weapon that the U.S. had in Russia long term. And this is supposed to be an own. They're cutting off Russia from Marvel movies, porn, sugar water, social media. This is supposed to hurt them. They're going to be Wakanda by next Christmas. It's like when you criticize women and they're like, good luck getting laid, which sort of implies that their only agency is their sexuality and that they're like highly subject to emotionally governed groupthink. Like, sweetheart, surely you're not suggesting that women have nothing else to offer, right? So maybe it says something When the West gets mad at another country and they tell them, well, we're not going to give you incessantly repetitive children's movies, pornography, poison food, and degenerate media. Like, if that's all we can export to the rest of the world anymore, maybe we aren't the good guys. Does anyone really believe that we're the good guys? I mean, like, we're the good guys, right? But these guys, these libtards, they really are a menace, aren't they? And they're global, which makes things pretty tricky, especially because they're a death cult. Like, are they not? Like, these disgusting, scorned, hateful people, they project this hatred onto us at any given opportunity. You're so hateful. You hate me because I'm full of love.
Hydrate.
I'm so loving and you're just hateful and mean. Which is ideologically fluent, since leftism, of course, is a rejection of nature, and nature is life. So yeah, they're a death cult. And if you've been paying attention for the last 2 years, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, these people want blood. It's people who aren't vaccinated, it's truck drivers, it's now Russians. Before then it was people in MAGA hats, but these people are thirsty for blood. They are miserable people with nothing to lose because their lives are miserable, and they've been conditioned to think that it's because of you. That is dangerous. And you see this now with Russian businesses being vandalized, Russians being refused service, people aren't selling Russian vodka, which of course is all just politically correct tribalism because, you know, Russians are white. Like, we weren't even allowed to say Wu flu. We had the whole Stop Asian Hate narrative, which invented more anti-white sentiment, despite the fact that virtually 100% of all the attacks were being perpetrated by black people, or even the war crimes that you're seeing now against Russian POWs. I've seen the leaked videos. I wish I didn't. And of course they'll say, well, it's probably staged. They never said that about the reverse, though, or even believed it when it was proven to be fake and staged, that the Ukrainians were staging these things. Or when Ukrainians were shelling ethnically Russian areas while retreating, there was no coverage. Ukrainian government handing out weapons to criminal gangs, causing chaos and more civilian deaths, no coverage. Ukraine purposefully defending from residential areas to force as many civilian casualties as possible to gain support for Western involvement in the conflict. No coverage. Why not? Because you are the Russian. You are the guy who allegedly died from COVID after speaking out against the vaccine. Remember how they would masturbate to those articles? Whenever these people see dead Russians, Russians getting tortured, when they demand the most brutal methods of execution, they're thinking about you. It doesn't matter what skin you're wearing, right? The truck driver, the Trump voter, the Russian, they only view you as something opposed to the liberal regime. And so they have a vicious contempt for you. Above all else, because you're normal. Never forget that these people hate what is normal, and you can see it on their faces. They want to make the world as disgusting and backwards as they are. They're openly saying that being a...
This is all just fascist talking points, by the way. This is, and again, he's going to be like, Godwin's Law. Not that he watches this anyway, I don't care, but he's literally just doing, like, Nazi fucking talking points.
Soldier means doing what you have to do, including killing a surrendered soldier and unarmed enemies. Just like in Saving Private Ryan, doing what you have to do is a means to what ends. What is the ultimate good? It is whatever they want as defined by the global libtard menace. It's starting to become clear how Bolshevism had so many willing executioners, isn't it? Jordan Peterson gets this absolutely right. He says it's revenge against God for the crime of being. It's Cain and Abel. They destroy everything natural and...
Is he trying to be banned? Maybe.
Good and beautiful.
You can take the slot before or after Nick Fuentes on whatever streaming app he's on now.
In 1935, it was a bullet to the back of the head while on your knees in a field if these people determined that you were an enemy to the people. And one of these freaks would be the ones pulling the trigger. Never forget that these people are all cut from the same cloth. Read about Bolshevism. Read about the Spanish Civil War. History repeats because the world and human nature never change. Leftists have always been like this. You just don't learn about it.
Bolshevism was literally a talking point of original Nazis, too. Cultural Bolshevism.
Because they control the flow of information. They have always been angry, disgusting, resentful people. And you're their target because you're normal. And look at how quickly they get everybody on board with this, or at least to reveal their bloodlust towards normal people. They manufactured a global outrage in a matter of a week, and it wasn't real. It was put there by people who know you better than you know yourself, because they've studied the brain and they know how to manipulate it, which is why there have been dozens of wars with millions of casualties in the last 2 decades. You didn't care about any of them until you were told to. But you can't even explain this to them anymore.
John, why do you think I don't care? I do care. What?
In person. They've been infected by it. All the Ghost of Kiev, Ghost of Kiev, Ghost of Kiev, epic Snake Island warriors that die rather than surrender, so epic. And it's all lies. That's not even the point, though. It's not to get Ukraine excited, to boost their morale. It's to prime these fucking Marvel-brained Reddit zombies into becoming neocons, and it's working. Like, we're watching.
John Doyle is a subreddit, just FYI.
in real time as our intelligence agencies and corporate media outlets are literally manufacturing consent for U.S. intervention in this conflict by turning it into an epic story with epic heroes and dialogue, and it's working. And half of them who support
Wagrod says the Bolsheviks were on the side of the democratic people's resistance to a fascist coup in Spain.
Support this, admit that they know it's fake, but they want to pretend it's real because it's like their favorite movie or something. And remember, this is the same class of people who think they're so educated for knowing who Noam Chomsky is. Oh, Trump did something? Huh. Read manufacturing consent. Read manufacturing consent. Read manufacturing consent. You go to their Twitter profile, Ukrainian flag, Black Lives Matter, they, them. Like, bro, you are the manufactured consent. It's you. Anyone with a greater than room temperature IQ knows the media and governments are corrupt liars, yet you side with them, and through this demonstration, we learn more about you than them. But the good news, at least, is that in the last few years, everyone's been forced to show their hand. I mean, we know what cards everyone is holding, and we know who has a spine, and we know who doesn't. We learned about the percentage of the population that can literally be reprogrammed to believe absolutely anything, like when they call us cattle, they're not joking. It's not nice, but they're not joking. It's literally an NPC software update. New NPC AI installing. Because whenever something happens that...
In the same breath, he's saying half the population will dehumanize the other half of the population while calling that half of the population that he disagrees with NPCs. Wow. Speedy Yoshi says he's bitching about Marvel movies, but he made an entire video about how Gaston is the best character ever because buff and misogynistic. Hernandia Owl says John rallying against people liking movies, not very neo-Gastonian. And Wagrod says, what does John think corruption is? What is corrupting what?
The ruling class decides is important, which is typically why it happens in the first place. All of these people move to voice their allegiance with...
Under 10 minutes left, guys.
...the correct side as deemed by the media and the elite. Like, there's no nuance, no context, just pure, raw allegiance, which is communicated primarily via social media. You share the infographics, you change your profile picture, you share links to funds and charities, and you generally vocalize in support of the correct side. And if you can tell... I've been fully convinced now, after flirting with this for the better part of the last 2 years probably, 95% of people are not even real. These are the same people who got excited about Coney 2012 as adults. I saw that when I was 12. I was like, oh no, we gotta help. And I watched it a few years ago and I was like, this is stupid. But if you breed a society of people who are always children, never really adults in the traditional sense, they'll believe anything, even something that only a 12-year-old would buy. So just know and be comfortable with the fact that like the vast majority of Americans have no real rational political criteria for what they support. They literally just bounce between ideologically antithetical positions based on nothing but marketing, public perception, and media narratives. And they even celebrate this. They'll argue that misinformation's bad, but liberal misinformation is good because it crowds out space where bad misinformation might take hold. Furthermore, the sentiment behind liberal misinformation is good. And isn't that really what matters? I don't know.
I don't agree with that, John. I don't think misinformation is good. I also don't think your beliefs are good, though, because, frankly, I think they're also based on misinformation. So.
Laura Edelson, I tend to like the truth, but we don't share common ground there, I guess. These people like control, and the biggest tool for control is your television. It's your phone. It's not me. It's not YouTube, man. This man is your friend. He fights for freedom. But if not for your television and for your phone, none of this would have any bearing on your life. You'd maybe hear about it and go, huh, that's messed up, but it wouldn't become the overriding ambition of your entire consciousness. The same way that if the media didn't coordinate to pretend that a new strain of the flu was something different, you'd have gone, flu season again, damn it. But
COVID conspiracies?
Nothing else would have happened. All of this hysteria is completely manufactured. It becomes less of a story and more just material with which to construct the hyper-consensus filter that dictates all of our lives. And now you have people who aren't supposed to trust the government and who aren't supposed to trust the media. Now they're getting psyoped into thinking that we need to go fight a war on behalf of the people who control both of those things. Well, yeah, but we're going to get some Ukrainian women out of it. No, you won't. No, I made that joke too. People started taking it seriously. Now it's got to stop. Stop romanticizing Ukrainian women. They're insufferable. Well, yeah, but they're super hot. They're super hot. If you want to get a hot girl, you got to deal a little crazy. No, you don't. No. Oh, to get a Lamborghini, you got to get a salvage title. Not if you can afford not to, big guy. Are we feeling anxious yet? Are we feeling indignant yet? I'm assuming if you're still here, which I appreciate, thank you, you more or less value my opinion in some capacity. So my prescription to you is to study history. A true study of history is one of the most enriching things you can do. It's almost meditative in a way. Like, it makes you feel less alone. You hear like, oh, history repeats. But when you study it in the proper way, not in the airport bookstore way, the proper way, you're like, uh-oh, like, it's real. But here's the good news. What we're dealing with now it might seem new, but it's not. You know, the technology might be new, the faces might be new, but in essence, we're suffering from the consequences of a decadent and perverse elite class, which is nothing new at all. I mean, they are the symptoms of a dying society, and we are an empire in decline now. And as we said earlier, these people have become so decadent and perverse that they literally have lost their ability to perceive reality. It's that simple. And since insanity and competence are mutually exclusive, as the machine drifts farther from reality, its ability to function diminishes, which is what we've been seeing for a few decades now, but very clearly for the last few years in particular. So as the political order decays internationally, it's going to become more impotent on the global scale, but it's going to become a lot more totalitarian here at home to compensate for that. So preparing for that, you know, of course, they've been purging the military of opposition. They've been implementing the surveillance state, or rather continuing to. They're mobilizing law enforcement against political dissent at all levels. And if you want to see a good comparison of where we're headed, look at Brazil. Like, the only thing preventing us from becoming a third world country is the perceived strength of the US dollar. And now the things that would need to happen in order for that to go away are beginning to happen. And after that, the collapse of the material standard of living, you know, the only thing that we're going to have left is people. We're going to have our friends, we're going to have our family, those that we care about. And it's that network that's going to get us through that, if we are to get through that. So there's one more clip I want to play for you, which is a good ending summary, but also just...
Speedy Yoshi says, I hate tankies. One just said, bro, if I had a single teacher actually present Mao Zedong as a hero, I would have been over the moon. Ew. Then I was like, no, the Great Leap Forward didn't kill tons and tons of people.
Us is the one thing that we would have to hold us together, which is our families, our heritage. Even that is being destroyed. Take a look. So say what you will about Vladimir Putin. Oh, he's a dictator. You don't live under a dictatorship. You don't live under tyranny. Oh, he kills journalists. That doesn't happen here. I mean, literally any criticism that you could have of Putin in Russia exists here in greater magnitude.
No, it doesn't. John, you are literally allowed to go on the internet and criticize Biden, as am I, as I was allowed to criticize Trump regularly. The idea that, like, all opposition is snuffed out in the United States is so objectively untrue that I can't even believe he's trying to get this past his audience. Even I don't think they're that stupid.
Except that they're materially less well off than we are. But even that, I mean, you look at the gas prices and everything. If gas goes up, everything goes up.
It's $1.80 US right now per gallon in Russia.
Yeah, so whatever we have now to wave our finger at them, that's going to go away pretty quickly. The bottom line is that Russia, of course, is not perfect. But at the end of the day, Russia and China are nationalist and relatively traditionalist countries. And you'll say, well, they have higher abortion rates and they have higher HIV rates. That's happening in spite of Russia, right? Their government is not trying to orchestrate that from the top down like ours is. Our government has two official policies right now. One is official and has been for a while. One's on the way, that are some of the most like grotesque examples of tyranny I could ever imagine. And you don't see this in Russia. You don't see this in China. One, it is the current position of the West, whether that's in the United States or Europe, to replace its native populations with mass immigration. That is the official policy. They don't have that in Russia. So maybe they're all...
John, part of the reason for this is we're a capitalist society, unfortunately, and we don't have a replacement rate birth rate, which we don't even just need a replacement rate for capitalism to continue to function in the United States the way it is. You need an ever-growing population, which is unsustainable anyway. So what you have are people saying, hey, in order to at least make replacement rate, we need to bring people in from other places. And let me be clear, I'm not in favor of doing that simply for economic reasons, but I also think if people want to come to the United States, they should be able to, because I don't care. I don't have an issue with that. Meek says, it's funny how every time one of John's favorite countries does bad, it's never their fault.
Drunk, maybe they all are getting STDs, but at least they know that their descendants are more or less going to inherit the same country. Maybe it's a crappy country, materially speaking, but it's more or less the same country, whereas it is the official policy of America since 1965 and of Europe broadly speaking to replace the native populations with mass immigration from the third world. Secondly, the policy that's being worked on being totally implemented is where the state can say, well, you're not agreeing with your child's gender identity, so we actually have the authority to usurp you as the parents and know what is best for the child, and we can come and save that child, we can come and take them out of that bad situation.
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but if it did happen, I wouldn't have an issue with that. You can't take care if you can't take care of a kid that is trans, then you shouldn't have that kid.
Which, anytime they talk about the child consenting, obviously it's because they want to rape your kids, but it's also because they like the child can never consent because it's a child. Something is always going to be fueling that. And if it's not the parent, it's going to be the media, it's going to be teachers. Someone's always going to be talking into their ear, telling them, oh, this is what you need to be doing. So when they're saying we want the child to be able to consent, that's just them wanting control over the child, to take that away from you. And if you don't have
projection
country, you don't.
Sky Cup Fallen says, John doesn't realize that the Great Replacement was what his ancestors did when they kicked Native Americans out of their land. Another right-wing projection. And that's not even a good comparison.
You don't have land, you don't have heritage, and not even going back, you don't even have a future, you don't have forward, you don't have your descendants. What left do you have? So, yeah, Russia sucks. But you know what? As long as they are destabilizing and serving as the biggest impediment on the global stage to a satanic evil empire that is the United States, they have my full support. God bless Vladimir Putin. Whoa, hey, take it easy, big guy. Let's not blow things out of proportion here. And a lot of people will listen to this, how we went through the whole explanation.
Can't say that.
And they might understand why we're sympathetic to Russia, why we're against the globalist American empire and the global libtard menace. But they'll still see clips like that, and they'll think that we're using almost endearing language to describe Putin or Xi Jinping because we secretly like them. We think they're aligned with us or something. Maybe they're more aligned with us than our own leaders are because they're not trying as hard to destroy us. But I think the real explanation of that is this. You look at China. They had their century of humiliation, a century of losing, of existing not proudly but pathetically. And now in less than a few generations, they're becoming a global superpower, if not the global superpower. Or you look at Russia, you look at a guy like Vladimir Putin, a guy who saw the collapse of the Soviet Union, something I believe he described as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And he sits back and he bides his time and he takes power and he starts to slowly get things on the right track by his standards, just like by Xi Jinping's standards, China's getting on the right track. And the point is this: we're entering our period of
Is John
humiliation.
under the opinion that Russia's situation is improving and is going to improve as time goes on? John, no. Basically, since 2014, the economy of Russia has been dog shit, and it's only getting worse since the imposed sanctions recently. Russia's doing bad. MW1642, thanks for gifting a sub.
We are 1990s Russia. The same way that some girl breaks your heart, you cry about it, but then you use that vision of yourself in a pathetic state to start lifting weights and bettering yourself. We have been flying too close to the sun for too long. Maybe it's our fault, maybe it's someone else's fault. It's nonetheless true. The same way it took China 100 years to rise, they were humiliated, defeated, raped, literally by Japan. They were balkanized by warlords. They had famines and communist genocides. Now here they are. And because we all know the cycle that things are going to get worse before it gets better, maybe this is the way that ends up happening. Maybe, as bizarre as it sounds, maybe Russia needs to win so that the West can see defeat and then learn from it. Because no one can learn from comfort or
what a patriot.
stagnation, which is what we have now. To borrow from our Marvel fanboys, it's the only way, right? But in the
is that a thing that gets said in? Wait, what movie does that get said in? Maybe he's a bigger Marvel fan than me. I don't even know where that quote's from.
Same way that Russia's not like exactly winning, but more so that the West is losing because we're stupid. The right in this country isn't winning. It's just that the left is losing because it's stupid. And if we want to win, we have to act like it. But in the meantime, batten down the hatches, my fellow pirates, because it's going to get worse from here. And there doesn't appear to be anything good yet on the horizon for us. Hey guys, if you like this video, leave it a thumbs up, leave it a comment, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications, and of course, excuse me, did a lot of talking. Share the video with a friend, preferably your middle-aged liberal wine aunt, please. Please. I did so much talking, dude. Anyways, okay, we're feeling good. I did want to ask, I don't want to do any more big projects like this for a while. What do you guys want to see? Do you want to see less
John, you haven't put out a video in 2 months.
Frequent, but longer content that is more thorough? We really dive into things, or do you want to see more frequent content that doesn't get as big picture, I guess?
Can I also point out that I think everything John wanted to say in this video, he could have said in 30 minutes tops, but he kept repeating himself. Overthought says, I don't run marathons, but damn, I'm gassed.
I would say, you know the difference. Just let me know in the comments, and I will be reading. So, hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. May God bless America.
All he did was he basically kept saying he thinks America is decadent and deserves to fucking go under, and that America is always wrong because he feels that elites that are, quote, globalist in the United States are evil and don't have the interests of people other than themselves at heart. And it's interesting, too, because there's a kernel of truth to some of the stuff John says. I agree that wealthy people in the United States, what we would consider like oligarchs, I agree, they have their own best interests in mind, not that of the American population as a whole, but he uses that to entirely push this, like, weird fascist, like, illiberal society, this anti-democratic, authoritarian, fascist belief system. It's gross. So anyway, that's John Doyle. I guess we'll see or hear from him again in another 2 or 3 months at the rate he's been going.